Are you finished building those basic websites that even AI tools like V0 can quickly spin up? Now is your time to flex and build a modern landing page with smooth animations that stand out from other, let's be honest, outdated and boring sites. This is our top UI UX video yet, and probably the best one you'll find on YouTube. Let's take a look at the final application you'll build to future-proof your skills. Presenting Brainwave, a modern AI app. You'll build a beautiful hero section with different shapes reacting to your cursor, a navbar with a colorful button that transforms into an animated hamburger menu when you're on smaller screens. And look at that subtle, smooth scroll parallax effect that moves these elements down as we scroll. Moving on, we've got a nice services section featuring gradient borders on the cards and unique curved rectangle shapes. Each of these cards also reveals a hidden background image. Next, we have a pattern that showcases the most important elements in a circular layout. After that is a very fresh and modern web development layout called Bento Box. Many popular companies like Apple, Linear, and Clerk use this layout to display their features effectively. Below, there's an always needed pricing section. After that, there's a grid style layout presenting the application's roadmap with gradients, grid lines, high quality images, and geometry lines on both sides, creating a modern look. Lastly, there's a simple footer where we connect to the website's social media pages. Of course, everything's 100% mobile responsive, which makes this a perfect tutorial to learn not just how to code a design like this, but also the best practices of responsive front-end development, which will save you hours and make you a front-end machine. This is the best time to go beyond the basics and make something cool and creative to show that you're at least one step ahead of AI tools. And for that, we have to thank our friends over at UI8. Their creativity made this special design possible. This video features just a couple of screens out of 44 pre-made screens and hundreds of components. Check them out, the link is in the description. And if you're still wondering if you should learn how to build this, trust me, you really should. JavaScript knowledge is required, and I highly recommend taking our Tailwind CSS crash course before watching this video. The first step in building our app is setting up our hosting. I want to teach you how to deploy this incredible app to the internet so everyone can see what you've built. See, the app you'll build today isn't just a project, it's a career asset. It's designed to showcase everything you're capable of, making you an attractive candidate for any job. I highly recommend Hostinger for this app. They're offering an amazing deal right now. I'll go for the business plan. Here's why it's perfect for this project. You get up to 5 times increased performance, free SSL for HTTPS security, which builds trust with anyone visiting your website. You also get a free domain name, giving your website that professional touch, and a free CDN to speed up your site. It ensures that your website loads quickly, improving the user experience. And because we've partnered with Hostinger, you get an even bigger discount. So click the special link in the description, click Claim Deal, and Add to Cart. Here, we have to choose the period of our hosting, and I'll choose 48 months to save the most. Down below, you can choose your payment method and enter your JavaScript Mastery coupon code, which gives you the biggest available discount on your hosting package. And once you purchase, we are ready to set everything up. Right within Hostinger's guided setup, it's asking us what tool we want to use, WordPress with AI or the Hostinger website builder. In this case, we are real developers, so we're going to click skip as we want to develop our own website. And I love this UI. As you can see, I'm using Hostinger to host our official jsmastery.pro website. There, you can check out our ultimate Next.js course, or if you're a bit more advanced, the JSM masterclass. But for our Brainwave, let's try to think of something unique. I'll go with JSM-Brainwave. And in this case, the .com domain is available and it's completely free for the first year. Let's click next. And once your domain registers, you'll also be able to choose where your website target audience is, so that way it loads fastest for them. I'm gonna leave it as the default and click next. And just like that, our hosting has been set up. Now, let's actually develop our application so that at the end of this video, we can deploy it using our new hosting and domain name. To start developing our fantastic project, we'll start from bare beginnings by creating a new empty folder on our desktop. We can call it Brainwave and simply drag and drop it into your empty Visual Studio Code. Once you have it, open up your terminal and we can get started. First, I'll teach you how to set up your React project using Vite, and then we'll set up Tailwind CSS, which will allow us to style our applications much more easily. So, to get started, you can head over to tailwindcss.com, click Get Started, Then go to Quick Search and type Vite. Click Install Tailwind CSS with Vite, and let's follow the steps. First, we have to create our project. So let's just copy this command right here, paste it within our console. But then, instead of my project, type /, which will create this project setup within our current repository. Press Y to install create Vite CLI, and then, as you can see right here, run npm install to install all the necessary dependencies, and then run npm run dev to run our project on localhost 5173. And there we go. We are live with Vite and React. Now, let's follow the second step in our guide, which is to install Tailwind CSS. So let's copy this command, stop our terminal from running, clear it, and paste what you copied. npm install -d, Tailwind CSS post CSS auto prefixer, and then later on after that, npx Tailwind CSS init-p. Once you do that, you'll see some new files appear. Next, let's follow the other steps as well, such as configuring our template paths. So copy this content part, and let's head over to tailwindconfig.js. That is right here, and modify the content. That way, it will know where to find Tailwind CSS class names. Next, we have to add our Tailwind CSS directives. So copy this, head over to source, index.css, remove everything from here, and simply paste the Tailwind CSS directives. Then, as the application says, run npm run dev one more time. And let's make some changes to our app.jsx, such as by adding this h1 that says hello world. So if we go right here, we can remove what we have right now and just replace everything with a simple h1. We can remove the count, the logos, and everything else that's in here. The only thing we need is the import of the app CSS and this hello world. Back on our localhost 5173, you can see that it is bolded and underlined, which means that Tailwind CSS is properly reading our utility class names, such as text3excel, font bold, and underline, and it's applying specific CSS properties. If this pop-up is not appearing for you, telling you exactly which CSS styles are getting applied, that must mean that you don't have the Tailwind CSS extension. So simply type Tailwind under extensions and install Tailwind CSS IntelliSense. With that in mind, you've successfully set up Tailwind CSS with your simple Vite project. Now, let's focus on formatting a bit to ensure that our codebase is always clean and readable. You can create a new folder within the root of your application called .vscode. Within there, create a new file called settings.json. Doing this, we're specifically applying some settings just for this project in the workspace. It won't work for all of your other projects. This is very handy to use if you have different settings for different projects you're working on. And for this project specifically, I have created a configuration that uses Prettier that my entire team and I use when creating these projects. So you can find it in the README of this project, copy it, and then paste it right here. It's going to apply some Prettier properties like tab width, single quotes, and more. Now, if you go back to your app.jsx, and if you modify something or just press save, you'll notice how automatically it will format it based on its properties. This will ensure that you and I always have the same exact code. The next thing we'll do is create a file and folder structure to make it easier to develop our application in the future. So you can head over to source and delete the app.css, as we won't need it, and remove it from app.jsx. All of the styles we'll use will be within the index.css. Next, we'll update our tailwind.config.js with the colors we'll be using throughout this project. This file will also be in the README down below, so simply copy it and then override what we have right here. You can see right here that we're adding some special class names, such as H1s, H2s, and so on, as well as we are adding some special font families and colors. That's more or less it. This will be very helpful later on, as we won't necessarily have to say, use the color AC6AFF. Rather, we'll be able to declare it in a simpler way. Another special thing that we've done here is this plugins part, which you can see here. This allows us to define some of the components that we can then later on use within our application, such as the H1s. We want all of our H1s to have same exact styles, which is why we apply these specific properties to all of the components that use the h1 class names. Next, we want to go inside of the index.css, and also in the README, you can find the updated file and override this one right here. Here, we provide some special class names for rotations, for some animations we'll have, but more or less, we simply import and set the fonts. And another thing we can do here is declare the color scheme to be dark, as most of our application will have dark colors. Now, if we go within our application, it's going to look something like this. So now that our base class names are set up, we can start focusing on the file and folder structure. But don't worry, you will still write all of the styles. These are only some baseline classes. So what we can do next is open up our terminal and open up a new terminal tab, inside of which we can install React Router DOM by running npm install react-router-dom. Then we can go to source and main.jsx, and we can wrap our entire application with the router by wrapping our app right here with the router, which is coming from React Router DOM, like this. We have to close it, of course, and indent it properly, which Prettier will do for us, which is great. Now, it's not a router right here that we have to import. Rather, it's the browser router as router coming from React Router DOM. Great. This is exactly what we want. Next, if you go to your browser, you can notice how you have this default Vite logo. We want to make this a real favicon corresponding to our application's UI, such as this one, Brainwave. To do that, you can delete the existing assets folder within the source folder. And then in the README down below, you can find the assets folder containing all of the images and icons we'll be using throughout this project. So simply download it, unzip it, and then drag and drop it here within the source folder. And if you expand it, you'll see a lot of different images, all sorted within their own sections. You can also see that we have our Brainwave SVG, which is the actual icon we'll use for the favicon. Great. Now we want to head over within our index.html, and we can modify our link icon from vite.svg to something like .src or ./src /assets /brainwave symbol.svg. We can also modify the title to say Brainwave. If we save it and go back, you can see that our meta tags have modified. Now we have this Brainwave icon as well as the Brainwave title, which means that we are ready to start setting up our application skeleton, meaning the structure for where all of the components will go. Great job on setting up a React project using Vite, Tailwind CSS, formatting, and the base file and folder structure. To get started creating our layout, we can navigate over to our app.jsx, which will be our homepage. Here, we can declare our app using the es6 const function, like this, and then we can wrap our h1 with something known as a React fragment that looks like this. So we have a React fragment allowing us to add more elements right here. And of course, we have to close our return. Now, below our h1, we'll render something known as a button gradient. And to get access to this button gradient, we can say import button gradient from ./assets /svg /button gradient, like this. This button gradient is an SVG through which we're giving the gradient effect to the button. If you hold Command and navigate into this button gradient, you'll see different linear gradients. They're going to be used within buttons. We're giving an ID to each one of these linear gradients so we can then later on consume them within our code. So what do you say that we start off with a button component so I can show you how we're going to consume this button gradient? We can create a new component within a new folder called components. And within components, we can create a new file called button.jsx. Within our button, we can run rafce, which will create a new React arrow function. If this didn't work for you, that must mean that you don't have the ES7 React Redux React Native snippets installed. So install it and try again. Now we can import this button within our app.jsx just to test it out. So let's put it within a div, and that div will have a class name equal to. We can add a bit of a padding top, so like pt dash, and let's do a 4.75 rem. Whenever you want to provide specific values, then you can use square brackets. We can also, on large devices, provide a padding top of about, let's do 5.25 rem, and overflow of hidden. Within there, we can render our button component, which we can automatically import from components button. It won't be a self-closing component. We can give it a class name of mt10 for margin top, and an href of hash login. And it can say something for now. Now, if you go back to our localhost 5173, you can see this simple button right here, but we cannot yet see something. We just see hello world. That something is hidden because the button is just rendering the text that says button. So what we must do now is transform this button into a completely reusable component. This is why I wanted to start off this project with a simple button. Because if you can understand how to create complex reusable components on something as simple as a button, then you can do it for more complex things as well. So let's get started by making this button accept some of the props. For example, the class name or an href that we're passing here. We can destructure the props and accept a class name, as well as href. And later on, we also might want to accept a specific on-click, or some children that that button might accept, or even pixel values, or just color. Is it white or is it dark? Once we accept all of these values, we can then render that button. And we can just return it like we are doing here. But sometimes, let's say we want to make our button a link, and sometimes we want to make it a real rectangular button. To make that happen, we can render two subfunctions called const render button, which is equal to just an arrow function, where we have an instant return. Keep in mind, these are parentheses, not curly braces, where we just return a button component. And this button component will render a span element, rendering the children, like this. And it will also render a special button SVG component. So we can do it like this, button SVG, to which we pass the color, white. Now this button SVG, of course, has to be imported. So import button SVG from /assets/svg/button SVG. And finally, we can return the render button component and call it like so. And of course, we have to make sure that our path is correct. So just add an additional dot right here to ensure that we have the correct path. Now, back in our browser, you can see that we have something that resembles a clickable button, but right now it is within Hello World. So let's continue modifying the styles further. I'm going to put our browser to the right side of our editor, and that way we can see exactly what is happening. Now, when we're rendering this button, let's give it some additional classes by creating a new property at the top, const classes is equal to, and we can start defining them here. But before we start defining them, let's use them within our button by simply saying class name is equal to classes. Now, if we give it a class name of something like a button, you can see that it's automatically getting applied right here, something. Now, let's make that something a bit more interesting. Let's make it relative. Let's make it inline-flex. Let's give it items-center, justify-center, h-11 for height, transition-colors. On hover, we want to make it text-color-1. Now, if you're passing some specific pixel values, like this, pixel coming from props, coming from the parent component, then we're going to render it. Else, we're going to render a default of px-7. Next, if the white is true, then we want to render a text n of 8. And else, we want to render a text n of 1. And finally, if we have the class names, we're going to render them. Else, we're going to render an empty string. This way, we ensure that all of the properties that we pass from our parent component into our button indeed get passed to our button. You can see that from our app, we're passing something like padding top, we're passing a margin top of 10, and if we give it a margin top of 20 right here, you can see how it changes it. This is how you make reusable components. Now, I will go a step further here and make it even more reusable. I'm also going to define const span classes, and I'm going to give it relative and z index of 10. We can also now apply the class name to the span element. That way we can change and modify the text within it. Now, what if we don't want to render a button such as this one? What if we want to render simply a link? Well, we can create a new function for that by saying const render link, and then we can have a return statement, an automatic one again, where we have an anchor tag like this that will have an href of href because this is a clickable link. And we still pass over the class names from classes. And then the span and the button will be exactly the same, so we can simply copy it here. And now that we have render link and render button, we can choose when we want to render each one. So right here, we can say return. If the href property exists, then we can render the render link like this. Else, we can return the render button. There we go. In this case, we did pass the href, so of course, in this case, we will render a link. But if we now remove the href, if we make it a regular button, you can see that it will look something like this, all completely reusable. And we'll be able to expand on this component even later on and make it more dynamic. For now, this is good enough. I just wanted to teach you how to create reusable components. Now, let's create another component which is more important than the button for now, which is the header component. So we can head over to components and create a new header.jsx. We can run refce. We can remove this import from React as it's no longer needed. And within our app, we can remove this button. We no longer need it, but rather we can just render the header. Coming from /components/header, and we can also remove this h1. The reason we have this padding top is because the header is fixed and we don't want it to overlap with the content. So at the top, we'll show the navbar. With that in mind, we can head over to the header and start creating it. We can start with the structure by returning a div element like this that has a class name equal to fixed top-0, and this will pin it to the top. Z index of 50 to appear on top, background of N8 over 90, backdrop dash blur dash small. This is a CSS property that adds elements backdrop. It will kind of give it that glassy look. We also want to give it a border dash B for border bottom, border dash N dash 6. This is a border color. And on large devices, background of N8 over 90. And on large devices, backdrop of blur dash SM. Now we cannot see anything yet because this header has no content. But as soon as we add the header, you can see it here. Within this div, let's create another div. That div will have a class name equal to flex, items-center, padding x of 5, on large devices, padding x of 7.5, on extra large devices, padding x of 10, on max large devices like this, we can give it a padding y of 4 for top and bottom. Immediately within here, we want to render an A tag, an anchor tag, that will render the image of source is equal to brainwave. And this brainwave has to be imported from our assets by saying import brainwave from /assets. There we go. That's better already. Let's also give it a width of about 190 and a height of about 40 with an alt tag of brainwave. This anchor tag can have a class name equal to block, W of something like 12 rem, on extra large devices, margin right of 8, and an href of #hero, like this. This is an ID used for navigation. we want to specify what happens if we click it. And in this case, if we click it, we navigate over to the hero section. Now, I can notice this is a bit too close to the left side of the screen, and I can notice that I didn't put it within this inner div. So let's move it over to inside of the div we created not that long ago. There we go. That's much better. Now, below this anchor tag, still within the other div, we can create a nav element. And this nav will have a class name equal to hidden, fixed, top property of 5 rem, left 0, right 0, bottom 0 as well, background of N8, on large devices, static, on large devices, flex, on large devices, margin X of auto, and on large devices, BG of transparent. And of course, I have to spell the class name properly with a capital N. Now, within this nav, we can create a div to create some layout. This div will have a class name equal to relative, z of 2, flex, flex-call, items-center, justify-center, margin of auto, so m auto, and on large devices, flex row. And within it, we want to show all of our items, such as 1, 2, 3, and so on. Right now, we cannot see them because they're dark. And for that reason, to more easily map over our nav items, we can create a new folder within our source called constants. And within the constants, we can create a new file called index.js. In the README down below, where you found all of the other class names, you'll also be able to find this constants file. So simply copy it and paste it over here. Now you might wonder, 300 lines. Oh my God, is this our entire application coded for us? But not really, no. This is simply different lists of content, of text that we'll be using throughout our application. Such as when we're going over the pricing section, I don't want you to hard code all of these values. Rather, we'll extract them from here and then map over them. Similarly, we're doing that for our navigation bar. So if you see the navigation, immediately here, we create different link items with a title, URL, and the ID. So now we can go back over to the header and we can map over them. We can do that by scrolling over to the top and importing, in curly braces, navigation coming from /constants. Now we can use that navigation right here by using a dynamic block of code called navigation, and then mapping over it by saying .map, where we get each individual item, and for each item, we instantly return something. And that something is an anchor tag. This anchor tag can render the item.title, and it will have a key equal to item.id, as well as an href equal to item.url. So now we're mapping over all of these properties, and we're using the URL and the title. But if you save it, we cannot yet see it. And why is that? Well, that's because this nav is usually hidden. So if we expand our browser, you'll be able to see it right here. Features, pricing, how to use, roadmap, new account, and sign in. So we can keep this view right here while we're styling them. Let's also give this anchor tag a class name. This class name will be dynamic, and it will first turn each element into a block. Then it will also give it a relative, a font-code, which will apply a special font family, text-2XL to make it a bit larger, uppercase, of course, because we want to be able to click on these links easily, text-N-1 to change the color, transition-colors, and on hover, text-color-1. Of course, make sure to apply to the hover element. And now if you hover, that's already much better. We also want to turn on a special property called item.onlyMobile. So some of these properties will only be showing on mobile. And if that is the case, then we can do LG hidden, which means we can hide that item on desktop, or we can just apply an empty string, which will look like this. Now we can continue with the styling by giving it a padding X of 6 to create some spacing, We can also give it a padding Y of 6. On medium devices, we can give it a padding Y of 8. On large devices, we can give it a minus margin right of 0.25. On large devices, text-XS, and on large devices, font-semi-bold as well. This will make it look like this, a bit smaller. Next, we have to figure out which link is currently clicked, meaning are we on features or are we on pricing? To do that, we can use a special property called useLocation from React Router DOM by importing, in curly braces, useLocation coming from React Router DOM. Then, right at the top of our component, we can say const path name is equal to useLocation. And this will give us access to the current URL we're on. With that in mind, we can scroll down, and within the styles, we can check if the item.url is triple equal to the pathname.hash, in which case we can apply a z-index of 2. We can apply on large devices a text-n-1, and if that is not the case, we can then give a class on large devices of text-n-1 over 50. So now you can see all of them are grayed out besides pricing, or features or how to use. This works for all of the links. Next, let's also give it on large devices a leading of 5, which will increase the line height. And on large devices and hover, we can also give it a text n of 1. And on extra large devices, we can give it a padding x of 12. So now we have something that looks like this. Great. Finally, on the right side of the screen, we want to have a sign up. We're trying to replicate this. We want to finally use this reusable button component we created not that long ago. So we can head over below our div and below our nav and create another anchor tag that will have an href equal to hash signup, and it will have a class name equal to button, hidden, margin right of 8, text-n-1 over 50, and this simply allows us to apply this color we have declared in Tailwind CSS config, transition-colors, which will apply a nice transition once we hover over it, and on hover, we want to modify the text color to n1, as well as on large devices, set it to block. Within this anchor tag, we can say new account. There we go, we can see it here. And right below this anchor tag, we want to create a button, or rather we want to use our button component we have created not that long ago. So we can at the top just import it by saying import button from /button. This button will have a class name, which will be hidden usually, but on larger devices and larger, it will be visible. And it's going to have an href of hash login, and it will say sign in. If we save it, you can see how nicely it appears on the right side. Now, we're almost done with this desktop navbar, but I can notice that it's not going all the way to the end of the screen. So if we head over to our first div, we can see if we properly applied all of the classes. Top 0. Oh, we're also missing a left 0 right here to ensure that it's positioned on the 0 from the left. And we're missing a W-full, so for it to take the full width of the screen. This is more like it. We have the primary navigation, we have the new account and sign in, and if we expand it, this is looking wonderful on mobile devices, exactly the same as our deployed application. But unfortunately, there's absolutely nothing on our mobile screen. That's because we'll implement a completely custom mobile menu, which looks like this. You can open it and you can close it. So to get started creating our mobile navigation, I'm going to help you to create the circles behind the actual navigation. You can see these circles and these little icons. Let's make that happen first. And to make that happen, we can go to our file explorer, and from the README down below, you can download the design folder, unzip it, and then drag and drop it within our components folder. Within our design folder, you'll notice that we have a header.jsx file. And here we have things such as rings, sidelines, background circles, hamburger menu, and we're then using all of them right here within our app. I think you can understand what those are. Rings are the rings you see around. Background circles are those balls that you can see around as well. And sidelines are those vertical lines you can see here and here. The reason I wanted to provide you with this code is because all of these are hard-coded values that we can play with and find the ones that work accurately for us. It's just absolute positioning, more or less. But if you think this code is confusing, and if you're wondering how to properly use the absolute properties, I would highly recommend to check out the absolute positioning inside relative positioning guide by CSS Tricks. The link will also be in the README. With that in mind, we can now go back to our original header and we can import two things. One thing is to import the menu SVG coming from /assets/svg/menu SVG. And the other thing is to import the hamburger menu inside of curly braces from /design/header. And now we can neatly combine this mobile menu with the desktop menu we had before. So let's create a new use state at the top by using the use state snippet. Let's call it open navigation and set open navigation. And at the start, it will be set to false. Then we can modify this div by turning it into a template string like this, and then checking whether we are currently open or not by saying if open navigation, like this, then provide a bg of n8, else provide a bg of n8 over 90 and a backdrop blur small, like this. So now we of course have to import useState coming from React. And if you do that, you'll get an error saying that the hamburger menu does not exist. That's because we misspelled it right here. Hamburger menu, it's missing an R right here, burger. Once you fix that and reload, we're back in action. So now let's go below this div that's wrapping our items. And right here, let's render a hamburger menu, a self-closing component. And also, we have to make it show by going to our nav and modify the class name by once again making it a template string, close it with a template string as well. And then in here, we can check if the navigation is currently open. So if open navigation, in that case, we can make it flex, else we can make it hidden. And then we can remove hidden from here. Now, it's obviously false, but if we turn it to true, you can see the navigation menu. Of course, we're going to leave it to false by default, but now we want to go over below our sign in button and add a new button. This button will render the menu SVG, so it will look something like this. It will have the class name equal to margin left of auto, and on large devices, it will be hidden. Margin left auto will align it horizontally right here. We can also provide it a pixel property of px3. And to this menu SVG, it needs to know whether it's opened or closed, so we can provide it the open navigation state. Of course, we want to somehow turn it on or turn it off like a toggle switch. So right here, we can create a function called const toggle navigation that is equal to a function that checks if the navigation is currently open. In that case, we can set open navigation to be false, and else we can set open navigation to be true. Also, we can declare a function called const handle click. And once we click something, we want to set open navigation to false, because the last thing you want is have something opened, and then once you click on it, to then have to go and close it. You want everything to be closed automatically once you click. So now, back in here, let's attach this toggle navigation to our menu button by giving this button an onClick property of toggle navigation. If we save it, and if we click here, oh, nothing seems to be happening. But if we manually switch it to true, you can see that it works. So that must mean that something with the toggle navigation function is not good. Let's see if we're properly using this onClick property within our button component. And would you look at that? This reusable component button hasn't yet learned how to use the onClick. So we can simply pass it to this button by saying onClick is equal to onClick. Now, if we go back and click here, you can notice that it opens it. Although it's not looking exactly the same as the finished application, right? So let's see what's wrong with the layout. This hamburger menu should have been rendered below this div right here. That way we enclose the div and then have the hamburger menu. This will fix it just a tiny bit. I also think we forgot to pass an onClick listener to each one of our navigation items. So we can do that by saying onClick is equal to handle click. We'll most likely have to look into our div that's wrapping our entire nav or our entire header. So let's see, fixed top Z index, that's good. We can remove this color from here as we're changing it in the open navigation. Backdrop blur SM, we can also remove it from here. And let's see if that fixes it. And it does. This is great. We have our vertical lines, we have our linear rings, everything is looking great, and we can open and close our mobile menu. As you can see, the only thing we've done is we've used this header component, which then goes over the rings, sidelines, and background circles, which are basically nothing more than absolutely positioned values. Sometimes beautiful designs like these, which you might think, how the hell did they do that? Well, they simply use absolute positioning. So now you know the tricks. Now, another important thing we have to do with this mobile navigation is implement a special package called screen lock. It's this package right here. And the only thing we'll use it for is to disable page scrolling. This is for mobile devices. This will ensure that once you open up the page, you cannot scroll once you're here. Rather, once you click somewhere, then the page will scroll automatically to that element. So let's install it by going to our terminal and running npm install scroll lock. Let's go back to our header and let's import disable page scroll and enable page scroll, which can be imported from scroll lock. Finally, once we toggle the navigation off, we want to enable the page scroll so we can once again scroll. Make sure to put the P as uppercase as it has to be, so enable page scroll. And once we turn on this mobile menu, then we can disable page scroll like this. Also, once we click on a specific element, if not open navigation, so if it's closed, then we simply want to return. We are not allowed to click then. And here we can just enable page scroll and set navigation open to false, because that means that we clicked and we are ready to go somewhere else and scroll once again. And with that in mind, you have successfully implemented your first major component, the header. Not only this beautiful mobile header that looks like this with absolute position values, that once you click, it leads you to a specific section, but also this great desktop header, which looks like this. You have the logo on the left, you have some links in the middle, you have the new account and sign in on the right. This looks clean. But what's even cleaner is this phenomenal modern hero section with this nice looking image, a great heading, and a call to action button. So without any further ado, let's get started not only with creating our hero section, but by creating a reusable section component, which we'll use for all of the sections to come. To start creating a reusable section component, we can start creating it like we would any other component by creating a new component within the components folder called section.jsx, where we can run rafce to get it up and running. This component will act as a common skeleton which we'll reuse in all section components. This component will create all the lines between different components. So to start working on this component, let's first accept some props, such as class names or class name, the ID of the section, the crosses, whether we have them or not, crosses offset, soon enough you'll see what this is, custom paddings, and children. Once we have that, we can return our div, and to that div, we can provide some class names by giving it a class name of, and we want to make it dynamic. So we're going to do it like this and give it a position of relative. Check if we have custom paddings, and then also provide all the other styles, such as padding Y of 10, on large devices, padding Y of 16, on extra large devices, padding Y of 20. Then if we have crosses, so if crosses, then on large devices, we can give it a padding Y of 32 and extra large of padding Y of 40. Else, just render an empty string. Finally, if we're passing some additional class names, we can just render them here, or else just render an empty string. Now, within the section, we can render the children. So we can say children right here, meaning whatever we pass into it will be rendered right here. And we can also create the divs for the sidelines. Let me show you what those are. So on the finished website, if we go right here, you can see those lines. This one right here with those two crosses. So we want to differentiate our sections in this very, very interesting way. So to do that, I'm going to collapse our browser to mobile view, and I'm going to create a div that will usually be hidden. So it will have a class name of hidden. It will be absolute, top 0, left 5, with a width of 0.25, h-full, and bg of stroke -1, pointer events none. On medium devices, it will be block, meaning visible, and larger. And on large devices, left 7.5 to move it a bit away from the left corner. And on extra large, we're going to give it a left of 10. Similarly, we can duplicate this one and make it the same, but for right devices. Right 7.5 and right 10. And we also want to handle those crosses that you saw before. You cannot see them on mobile devices, but you can see them on desktop devices. So let's create a new dynamic block of code where we check for crosses. And if the crosses exist, we render a React fragment that has a self-closing div. This div will have a class name equal to, it will be a dynamic string of hidden, absolute, top -0, left -7.5, right -7.5 as well, h-0.25 for the height, bg-stroke -1, and a dynamic block of code if crosses offset exists, then we render the crosses offset like this. Also, we're going to give it pointer events none, and what this does is this disables all the pointer events, so we cannot click it. On large devices, we will show it, so it will be block. Usually it will be hidden. On extra large, we'll give it a left of 10 and right of 10, usually like this. Now, if we go back to our website, still nothing is happening because we haven't yet used this section, and we will use it very, very soon. But before that, we want to import those crosses at the top by saying import section svg from /assets /svg /section svg, and then we can use it right here if we have crosses below this div by simply saying self-closing component of section svg, to which we pass the crosses offset if it exists. There we go. So now we are ready to finally use this section. And before we use it, you can see that we have one warning right here, and that is that the class name is missing in props validation. This is just an ESLint warning, which we can fix if we go to eslint.rc.cjs. If we go to rules and then add an additional rule that's going to say react /prop types will be set to off like this. And of course, we have to close the string here. And now if we go back to our section, you can notice that it's no longer complaining. It is now just giving us a proper warning that the ID is not being used. And we do want to pass that ID over to this div. ID is equal to ID. And finally, we are ready to use this section within our application. And what other section will we use it for rather than our hero section? So let's create a new component within the components folder called hero.jsx. Just run refce, and let's immediately consume it within our app.jsx. Just below the header, we want to render a hero section looking like this. Hero. There we go. That's pretty simple, right? Now we can go into the hero and we can start developing it. The interesting thing here is that we're not going to wrap it in a typical div. Rather, we're going to wrap it in our section, which we have created just before. So we can import this section coming from /section. And if we save it, you can notice how it pushes it down just a tiny bit. And if I expand it, you can also notice that it applies some vertical lines. Although it's very hard to see right now, it'll be easier to see as we pass some additional properties to it. For example, I'm going to return this properly so it's easier to see. And I will pass our section some more props that it wants, such as a class name of padding top of 12 rem and minus margin top of 5.25 rem. I found those values to work the best. You can see how it shifts it. And we can also continue adding some more properties, such as crosses, as well as a crosses offset property of large translate y of 5.25 rem, like this. We can also give it a property of custom paddings, and we can give it an ID of hero, as this is our hero section. If we save it and expand our browser, you'll see that not a lot is happening right now. We cannot see any crosses or anything. That's because we don't yet have enough content within our hero section. So let's change that. Let's wrap our section with another div, and this div will have a class name equal to container and relative. Within this div, we'll create another div, and that div will have a class name equal to relative, z of 1, max-w of 62 rem, mx auto, this is for margin horizontal auto, and this will simply align all of the elements horizontally. We can also give it a text center to show the text in the center. We can give it a margin bottom of about 4 rem to provide some spacing. On medium devices, we can give it a margin bottom of 20, and on large devices, we can give it a margin bottom of about 6 rem as well. Finally, within this div, we can create a new h1 that will have a class name of h1. This is a special class we created before, as well as a margin bottom of 6. And within that h1, we can say explore the possibilities like this. And we can also copy whatever else we say here. Explore the possibilities of AI chatting with Brainwave. So let's simply copy it, paste it here. The deployed website will be mentioned in the description down below, so you'll be able to copy all the content from it. And then within this h1, we also want to create a span element. And this span will have a class name equal to inline-block and also relative. Here, we can say Brainwave. Now, below Brainwave, we want to also render a self-closing image tag. This image will have a source equal to curve, and this curve will be coming from assets. It will look something like this, and we can also give it a class name equal to absolute, top-full, left-0, w-full, and on extra large devices, we need to reposition the bit to fit below Brainwave to minus margin top of 2. There we go. We can also give it a width of about 624 and a height of about 28. I found those values to work the best, alongside with an alt tag of curve. Now we can head below this image, below the span and below the H1, and we can create a P tag, which will form our subheading. That subheading will contain all the text below, which will be this one. You can just copy it, and it can say unleash the power of AI within Brainwave. Let's style it a bit by giving it a class name of body-1. Let's also give it a max-w-3xl, margin X of auto, margin bottom of 6, text-n-2, and on large devices, margin bottom of 8. Right below this P tag, we want to show a call to action button. So it will be a button component, which we need to import from /button. I did that automatically right here at the top. And that button, since it's our component, we can pass it an href of / pricing. And we're going to give it a special property of white. And then we can say get started. There we go. Now we have a white button. Now this button is not looking great right now. You can see the text is not centered. So let's go into the button and let's see. If we apply white, why is it not centered? And usually it is. It looks like our classes are just a tiny bit wrong. So we do all the great stuff such as inline flex, relative, item center, justify center as well. Then we apply padding, and then we have this white property where we apply text n8 or text n1, and then after that we apply a class name. The issue is the typo I have right here where it says infline. It rather should be inline. And there we go. Now our button is fixed as well. Now below that button, we can start creating the rest of the structure, which is quite exciting. So we can go below the button and below the div and create another div, which will be the container for the rest of our hero section with a class name equal to relative max-w-23 rem, margin X of auto, on medium devices, max-w-5xl, so it has a lot of width, and on extra large devices, margin bottom of 22. Within that div, we'll create another div to keep building out that hero structure with a class name equal to relative, z of 1, padding of 0.5, rounded-2xl, and we also want to apply this bg-conic-gradient. Within that div, we want to create another div, and that div will have a class name equal to relative, bg-n-8, rounded-1 rem, like this. And within that div, trust me, this is the last one, we're going to create a self-closing div that will have a class name equal to h-1.4 rem, bg of n10, rounded-t-0.8 rem. That's going to give it this grayish rectangle. And below it, we can have a div within which we'll show this great looking robot image with a source equal to robot coming from /assets. We're going to also give it a class name equal to w-full. We're going to give it a width of about 1440p and a height of about 1800 pixels with an alt tag of hero, as in hero section. That's looking great. Now let's style the div wrapping the robot. It will have a class name equal to aspect-33/40. This is the aspect ratio. And let's of course call it div as it is. Then let's give it a rounded-b of 0.9 rem, like this. Let's also give it an overflow hidden, so we cannot scroll through it. And on medium devices, let's modify the aspect ratio. So aspect-688/490. I found those values to work the best. And on large devices, we also want to play with it a bit by saying aspect-1024/490. This will make it look good on all different kinds of devices and screen sizes. Now let's go 1, 2, 3 divs down, and below it, we're creating one last final div. And within that div, we're creating the image that will be the hero background. So here we can say source equal to hero background coming from /assets. Let's give it a class name equal to w-full. And looking at it right now, I think I provided the class names of this image to the image above. So we want to take this width and the height and the alt tag from the robot over to this below one. So we want to do it like this. Width 1440p, height 1800, alt is hero, and that's going to give us this great looking background. For now, this background appears below the robot, but soon enough, it will look like this. It's going to come from behind it. To do that, let's add more properties to our robot, such as width of 1024 and height of 490 and alt tag of AI. Now, let's add the class names to this div wrapping the hero background by giving it a class name equal to absolute minus top minus or dash 54%. This will make it appear below, or rather behind, this image. We can give it a left dash 1/2, which will move it a bit away, but then we can give it a width of 234%, which would make it a bit larger. We can also then use the translate property, so minus translate specifically, dash x 1/2. That's going to look like this. And now it's going to appear right behind it. Then on medium devices, we want to play a bit where we show it. So it's going to be minus top dash 46%, like this. On medium devices, W will be 138%. And on large devices, minus top dash 104%. There we go. So now we have this beautiful looking hero section, as you can see. And if we expand it, you'll see that it's looking great, but not perfect, as it says curve right here. We want to remove that part where it says curve. Rather, that is just the actual component or the image. There we go. And if we compare it with the finished product, we're still a bit off, right? It looks a bit different. So going back, now we can make the fixes for desktop devices. Here, we're missing the positioning in rems. You can use rems, you can use pixels, whatever you prefer. This one is 84 pixels. And it seems to me that the image is definitely not looking good. So it's not positioned correctly, as you can see right here. So let's scroll down to where we have our AI robot, and let's provide it some class names other than W-full. For example, we can give it a scale of dash 1.7, a translate of y of 8%, which will bring it a bit up, and then we want to play with that scale and translate on different devices. Such as on medium, we can set the scale to be 1. On medium, we also can do the minus translate dash y dash 10%. And on large devices, we can do a minus translate of y of 33%. So now, if we save it, you can see that it looks much closer to the final design. Although we're definitely missing some space between our header, we're much closer than we were before. As you can see, on the final website, we have these moving circles, which we already implemented before, as well as these circular rings that go in the middle of the screen. So let's implement it. To start implementing it, we'll get some help from the package called, first we have to install it, React Just Parallax. So React Parallax, and then we'll use the same rings we have used before from design, but this time in the hero. You can see gradient, bottom line, we have different rings, and all of that is being displayed within background circles. And these little things within divs that are mounted, these are the balls that you can see flowing around. So now to implement those rings and circles and everything, we can head over to the hero section that we have developed, and we can import everything we need. We can import the background circles, bottom line, as well as gradient, coming from /design/hero. We can also import something known as hero icons coming from / constants. And let's not forget the parallax. We can import the scroll parallax coming from React just parallax. And it looks like we have to fix the import for our hero. We are right now within hero, so it's going to be just / design hero. There we go. Now, to make it work, we can give a ref to our div of the hero section by saying ref is equal to parallax ref. And we can define that ref right here by saying const parallax ref is equal to use ref, which is a hook, which we have to import at the start equal to null. Once we have that ref, we can navigate over below our image of the robot, of the AI, and then there we can render the scroll parallax coming from that package which we just installed. There we can say is absolutely positioned, which is one of its properties, and we can render a UL or an unordered list within it. We can give it a class name equal to hidden, absolute positioning, as we said it will be, a minus left of 5.5 rem, a bottom of 7.5 rem, padding x of 1, padding y of 1, background of n 9 over 40, backdrop blur border, and border -n-1 over 10. Let's not forget to make it a bit rounded of 2XL, and on extra large devices, it will be flex. Now within there, we'll be able to show all of these different icons that you can see here floating around. So if we go back, within this UL, we can open up a dynamic code and say hero icons dot map, where we get each individual icon and an index for that icon, and we can immediately return an li that has a class name of padding of 5, so p5, and a key equal to index. And within it, we render an image that has a source equal to icon, a width of about 24, a height of about 25, and its alt tag will be equal to just icon. Now, if we save this, you can see this menu appeared. Later on, we can make it clickable as well. And you can see how it flows. We have this parallax effect, which is really cool, and it is done by the library we installed. 2 divs down below that parallax, we want to render a self-closing gradient component, which looks like this. And this will give it this nice looking gradient to make it really pop. And then going below this background hero that we have here, specifically one div below the image, we want to render the background circles, which we also created not that long ago. And this will make it move like this. Now, this hero is looking much closer to the finished website. Let's see where is it missing some top margin from. If we check out our hero section, here we're giving it a padding top of 12 rem. But if we go within the section, let's see if we're actually implementing that class. So if we really make sure that everything is nicely divisible, we have relative, we then start with custom paddings. So if custom paddings are applied, apply them, else apply all of these styles right here, and then at the end, apply class names. Now make sure that this code is exactly as it is here, and then it will work. Most likely had a typo somewhere. And if it still doesn't work, you can refer to the finished section.jsx code, so simply copy it and override it. But once that is done, you'll be able to see that now our hero is looking amazing. Also notice that we're saying brainwave 2 times. So if I go back to my hero section and look at brainwave, we don't have to say it for the second time. We have it within the span element, and we have to provide some space like this. So now it looks great. Amazing job building this hero section. You can see that now it's very similar to exactly how it looks like on the deployed application. We'll do some more improvements soon, but even for now, this is just absolutely amazing. Great work. Now, the only thing that our hero is missing for it to be perfect are these little jumping add-ons. These cards that go up and down, where we can see what we can do within this AI app, such as code generation, and also this AI is generating. Also, I noticed we have a bit of a different text spacing. So if we go to our deployed application, you can see that AI is at the top, whereas here it's at the bottom, which has a bit of a nicer text hierarchy. So going back to where we are saying possibilities of AI, right before off, we can render the end sign and say NBSP and then a semicolon. And we can also put that after AI. So let's just do it right here, before and after AI. That should be better. So now if we save it, you can see off space, AI space, and then chatting with. But make sure that there's no space between semicolon and chatting with. Then it's gonna look exactly like this, which is now much more similar to this. And also it looks like I misspelled possibilities. Great. With that said, we can focus on what matters, which is implementing those flying add-ons to our robot screen. So first, let's focus on this AI is generating text. I'm gonna go back to our code. And if you look at here, we have a bit of a warning where it says that the bottom line is never used. So just before we implement those little add-ons, we can scroll to the bottom. And right before we're closing the section, we can also use this bottom line component. Now, let's go back to the components and create our first flying component. This one will be called generating.jsx. It's going to be a simple RAFCE component that's going to say generating, and it's going to render only a single image and a piece of text. This image will have a class name equal to W5, H-5, and margin right of 4. And we can also give it a source equal to loading. So this will be our loader. And this loader, we can import loading from /assets. And then we can also give it an alt tag of something like loading. And we can also say AI is generating. Now, if we save that, it's going to be nowhere to be found. But now, as soon as we style this div by giving it a class name equal to, it's going to be a dynamic template string, and it's going to have classes of flex, items-center, h-3.5, rem, padding x of 6, background of n8/80, and rounded-1.7 rem. Finally, it needs to render all of the class names that we pass to it. So we can say class name here, and then render class name, or an empty string if we don't have any. And we can also give it a text-base. This will just provide it a typical font size and line height, so it looks good. Now we want to use this within our hero section. So let's go to our hero, and let's scroll up above our scroll parallax. And here we can render the self-closing generating component, which we of course have to import at the top by saying import generating from /generating. And it won't be within curly braces. That's my bad. If we save it, we still cannot see it. And that's because we have to pass some additional props or styles to it. Specifically, we have to make it absolutely positioned by giving it a class name of absolute, left-4, right-4, and bottom-5. Now on medium devices, we can modify the left to 1/2, and on medium devices, we can make it right-auto. On medium devices, we can also modify the bottom to 8, and on medium devices, we can modify the width to about 31 rem, like this. And on medium devices, we can also use the -translate or -translate x 1/2. This is just to ensure that we properly position it on top of our image, which you can see right now looks absolutely perfect. Later on, we can even make this SVG spin, so it feels like it's generating something. And now, the last thing we have to do is this code generation card. And we can create it by creating a new component within the components folder, and we can call it a notification.jsx. We can run RAFCE, and we can immediately use it within our hero. It's also going to be within its own parallax. So let's recreate another parallax. scroll parallax. That means that it's going to move up and down. It will be absolutely positioned. And there we can render the self-closing notification component coming from /notification. And we can also automatically pass some properties to it. We can pass a class name equal to, usually hidden, but on larger devices we'll be able to see it, absolute minus right dash 5.5 rem, bottom of 11 rem, w-18 rem for width, and on extra large devices, flex, meaning visible. We can also give it a title of code generation. This will be what the notification will say. And now we can go into the notification and start creating it. We can accept the props we're passing into it, such as the class name and the title. And we can start styling our div by giving it a class name equal to. It's going to be a dynamic template string where we first render the class name or an empty string if it doesn't exist. In this case, it will because we're making it absolute. We can also give it a property of flex, items-center, padding of 4, padding right of 6, background of n9/40, backdrop-blur to make it feel like it's glassy, border-n1/10, which is the color, rounded-2xl, gap of 5, and that's it. Already, you can see this notification appear. Finally, we can wrap it within a div that has a class name of flex-1, and there we can render an h6. This h6 will have a class name equal to margin bottom of 1, font-semi-bold, and justify between, and it will render the dynamic title we're passing from props. Now it says code generation. Right below this h6, we're gonna create a div where we have a class name equal to flex, items-center, and justify between. And now that I look at it, this h6 doesn't need to have a justify between. It's gonna have a text base to modify its font size and line height. Within this inner div, we're gonna have a UL that will have a class name equal to flex minus margin of 0.5. And then within this, we can map over our images of the users generating something with AI by saying notification images, which we can import from constants, dot map, where we get each individual item and the index, and we can immediately return an li that renders a self-closing image with a source equal to item, a class name equal to w-full, a width of 20, and a height of 20 as well. So let's fix it, and let's also give it an alt tag of item. Now, if I save this, you can see all of these different user avatars. Let's style them a bit by giving this li a key equal to index, and a class name equal to flex w-6, h-6, border of 2, border-n-12, and most importantly, rounded-full, which will turn it into full circles, and overflow hidden, so we cannot actually scroll through them. There we go. This is much better. Notice how in the final version, we have this image of what they're generating. So we can add that to our application as well. By adding an image above this div with a flex of 1, this will be a self-closing image with a source equal to notification 1 coming from assets with a width of 62, a height of 62, and an alt tag of image. There we go. That's better already. And we can also make it a bit rounded by giving it a class name equal to rounded-xl. There we go. The last thing we need is a text that says 1 minute ago. So to do that, we can scroll down, and right below the UL, we can create a div that will have a class name equal to body-2 and text-n-13, and it can say 1M ago. There we go. Now this is looking more like it. It's fuller, and these things scroll up and down. If you want to make the AI is generating also scroll up and down, you can simply wrap it in this scroll parallax in case you want to do that. There we go. So generating, you wrap it into a scroll parallax and save it. And you can see that now it moves as well. But now it feels like too much is happening. I want to leave this here and only let those two move up and down. So I'm going to bring this back to what it was. Great. Finally, the last part of the hero that we're missing is helping people create beautiful content ad and then these different logos right here. So that's going to appear below the hero section, or rather still within it, but a bit below. So to create that last hero component, we can go to components and create a new file called company logos.jsx, where we can run RAFCE, and we can go back to the hero and immediately use it within here. That's going to be all the way at the bottom, below background circles, below a div, and then right here, company logos, imported from /company logos. And we can also provide it a class name equal to hidden on smaller devices, relative, Z of 10, margin top of 20, and on large devices, block, so it's actually visible. And now you should be able to see it somewhere here at the bottom, but it's quite dark, so you cannot see it. So let's go into the company logos, and let's make it appear exactly how it should be. We can do that by accepting these class names that we're providing, and then applying them directly to our div. Class name is equal to class name. That will make it appear right here at the bottom. Then within this div, we also want to render an H5 that will say helping people create beautiful content at, and then we want to start listing those logos. So we can remove this company logos. We can style this H5 a bit by giving it a class name equal to tagline, margin bottom of 6, text-center, and text-n-1/50. That's much better. And below the H5, we can render a UL that's going to have a class name equal to flex, and it's going to render or map over company logos coming from constants, dot map, where we get each individual logo, an index of that logo, and we return an LI for each one of these. That renders a self-closing image with a source of logo, a width of about 134, a height of about 28, and then we can also say alt is going to be that actual logo. If we save it, you can see all of those logos at the bottom. And to style it a bit, we can give this LI a class name of flex, items-center, justify-center, flex-1, and h-8.5 rem. And of course, we have to also give it a key equal to index. If we save it, you can now see those beautiful logos. And now we can say that our hero section is looking wonderful. This is one of the most modern designs I have seen in the long time. These circles or bolts move as you scroll, but still they're not taking away your attention. You have those circles or rings actually bringing your attention to this button and to this image. Here, these cards nicely float, showing you what you can do with this software, and then you get instant approval by seeing other companies using this software as well. Now that this hero is paired with our wonderful navbar, this is looking great, and let's not forget that it's also looking amazing for mobile devices. You can open it up, you can close it, scroll down, and here we remove or get rid of some of the clutter. You don't want to show all of these cards if you don't have enough space. On desktop devices, we have space. Here we don't, so we hide them. So that is it for the hero section. Phenomenal job on coming this far. But don't forget, this entire time, we haven't been just building the hero section or the navbar. We set the foundation for everything else we're gonna build. We have the reusable section component, which now creates these rectangular lines on desktop devices. And we have also set up the entire file and folder structure so that now we can simply render an additional section below the hero section. Specifically, the next one will be this one. We're gonna call it benefits, where it says what you can do with this app, such as ask anything, improve every day, connect anywhere, or much more. It looks great on mobile devices, but it looks even better on desktop. So let's go ahead and create the second big section of the day, which is our benefits section. And snap, I just changed our Visual Studio Code theme to make the video a bit more interesting. I switched it to a theme called One Dark Pro, whereas before I used this Capuchin theme. What do you think of this one? Let me know in the comments down below which one you prefer. But with that said, let's continue with the video. We want to focus on another big section of this video, which is the benefits section. So we want to add this tagline as well as these beautiful cards indicating different benefits of our application. So to implement it, we can create a new component within the components folder called benefits.jsx. In there, we can run RAFCE, and immediately we can import those benefits right below our hero. So we can say a self-closing benefits, which we can automatically import from components. Now, if we go into the benefits, we can start creating them, and we should already see benefits right here at the bottom, although it's quite hard to notice. But we will be able to notice it once we wrap our benefits into a section component coming from /section. This will give it some space and nicely position it on the screen. We can also give it an ID equal to features, so we can later on scroll through it dynamically from the navigation bar. And what do you say that within this section, we also have a div with a class name equal to container, relative, and a z of 2. Within this div, we can render a special heading component. This is a component that we haven't created yet, so we can create it right away by creating a new heading.jsx component and run RAFCE. Then we can simply import it within our benefits, just like this. And now we can see heading. And to this heading, we can pass two props. We can pass a class name prop, allowing us to further style our heading, and we can also pass it a title prop. In this case, it can say something like chat smarter, not harder with brainwave, and we can paste it right here. There we go. So now, if we go back into the heading, we can accept these class names as well as a title coming from props, and we can use them when creating this heading. So right here, this heading will be a very reusable component. It will allow us to use it as a title, as a subtitle, as a large text, tagline, and it will take many more forms. So right here, we can check if we're getting the title, and then within this div, we can say title and render an h2 that will render this title. And we can also give a class name to this h2 to be equal to h2. Now, if we save this and go back, you can see chat smarter, not harder with brainwave. We also can do something with those class names, and specifically, we can use them within our div. So this div can accept a class name equal to, it's going to be a dynamic template string where we can render the class name dynamically. And we can also pass it some additional styles, such as max-w of 50 rem, margin x of auto, margin bottom of 12, on large devices, margin bottom of 20. So now if we save it, we can pass some additional class names every time that we call our heading. And this is useful because you might want to call headings in different places. So for example, in this benefit section, we can pass it a media query of medium max-w-medium and on large max-w-2xl. So now as we scale this text, you can see how it will also change right here below. Great. This is it for the heading, but now we can focus on our benefits section. So right below this heading, still within the div, we can render another div, and this div will have a class name equal to flex, flex-wrap, gap-10, and margin bottom of 10 as well. Within here, we can map over our benefits, which we can import from /constants. So if you now dive into these benefits by command clicking them, you can see that this is a simple array with a couple of different objects. Specifically, each object is a card with an ID, a title, text, background URL, icon, and more. So what we can say is we can now say benefits.map, and we want to get each individual benefit. We can call it an item and automatically return something for each one of those items. Let's make sure that we properly close it right here. There we go. And I think we're missing one more div right here. There we go. We also want to give this div a key equal to item.id. Within that div, we can create another div. And within that div, we can have an h5 that simply renders the item.title. So now if we save this and scroll down, you can notice that we have 5 or 6 different pieces of text. Each one of these is a card. Even though right now it's just a piece of text, we will create that card. And we can do that by giving a class name to this outermost div. This div will have a class name of block, so each element is a block, relative for relative positioning, padding of 0.5 to provide some spacing, bg-no repeat, like this, bg-, and now this is a special one, we can give it a length by saying length 100% underscore 100%. So now the background will take 100% of the size of this div. And on medium devices, we can also say max-w-24 rem. Now, the way we'll apply that background image to each one of these cards is by using the inline styles. So we can say background image is, it's going to be a template string of URL, and then in parentheses, $ curly braces, item.background URL. So for each one of these cards, as you can see, we're getting a different background URL. Now let's style this inner div right here by giving it a class name equal to relative z-2 flex flex-col min-h-22 rem. And this will just give these cards a bit more size. Even though it looks silly right now, it will look better very soon. We can also give it a p-2.4 rem for some padding. That's much better already. And we can say pointer-events-none, as these won't be clickable cards. To this h5, we can give a class name equal to h5 and margin bottom of 5. Okay. And below the h5, we can also render a p tag that will render the item.text. And we can style it a bit by giving it a class name equal to body-2, margin bottom of 6, and text-n-3. These n colors are just special colors we have defined in our Tailwind config. You can call them anything you like. If we go into our config, you can see right here, if we go to colors, that we just call them different things. Of course, we could have named them something else as well. Now, let's go below this p tag and let's render a div. And this div will have a class name equal to flex, items-center, and margin top of auto. Within here, we're going to render the icon for this card by giving this image a source of item.icon URL, a width of about 48, a height of about 48, and an alt tag of item.title. If we now save it, you can see that each card just got a special icon. Looking good. Let's also provide a p tag to say explore more. So simple p that says explore more. And below, we can also render an arrow, which is a self-closing arrow component, which we can import at the top by saying import arrow from assets/svg/arrow. Now, if we scroll down, you can see explore more and arrow, but it's not really aligned. So let's style this p tag by giving it a class name equal to margin left of auto, font dash code to change the font family, text dash XS, font dash bold, text dash N dash 1 for the color, uppercase, and tracking dash wider. This will give it a bit of a bigger letter spacing. Finally, it looks like I messed up the item center right here. If we do that, it's looking much, much better. Now, if we go a bit down, 2 divs down, sometimes we might want to have a light item, which will be a bit different from other items. And in that case, if item.light is true, meaning end, then we can render the gradient light, which is another SVG coming from the top. So we can import gradient light like this, coming from /design/benefits. If we save it, you can now see this gradient appear over the cards we choose. And the way we chose it is we simply put it right here, card, light, true. And these ones don't have the light true, this one does have it. So you can just modify it, and that's going to give this nice effect of a gradient light appearing behind some cards just for some visual interest. Finally, we can go below this gradient light and create another div. This div will be interesting. If we go to the finished website, you can't really see a lot of stuff here, but if we expand it, you can see how if you hover over the cards, you get this nice looking image to appear. Well, this will be for that image URL. But we have to be smart with how we're going to place this image onto the card so that once we hover over it, it happens, or rather it appears. So let's give this div a class name equal to absolute, inset of 0.5, which will apply a CSS inset property, and a background of N8. We can also give it a style equal to clip path of URL benefits. I don't specifically remember why I had to add this clip path, but I think it helps showing those background images on hover. So within this div, we can have another div which will render that actual image. So if we properly close it, and inside we check if the item has an image URL like this, only then render a self-closing image property that has a source equal to item.imageURL, also a width of about 380 pixels, a height of about 362 pixels, an alt tag of item.title, and if we save it, you can now see those images everywhere, but we want to give it a class name of w-full for full width, h-full for full height, and object-cover, so it nicely fits right there. Now, to hide it or to only show it on hover, we can style this div by giving it a class name of absolute, inset-0, opacity-0, but then transition the opacity. On hover, opacity will be 10. So now, if we hover, you can see how it nicely appears in a lower opacity, so it doesn't take away from the card. And right below these two divs, we can also render a property called clip path, which we can import at the top by saying import clip path from /assets/svg/clip path. This is just a simple SVG, which ensures that we also see the ends of our cards. Oh yeah, this will actually apply that clip path of benefits. So now if we go a bit up and you see this clip path of URL, it will actually allow us to see full rectangles for these cards. And with that in mind, we're done with the benefit section. We reused this amazing section that allowed us to quickly create it. You'll see how it looks like on desktop devices soon. We used a couple of SVGs and we neatly mapped over our benefits, which are simply a collection of different data pieces. And we also created a heading, which will make much more reusable later on. And we helped ourselves with a couple of SVGs. So now if we close this and the heading, the benefit section is done. So let's see how does it look like on the finished website on desktop. There we go. This is looking great. If I compare it with the finished one, you can see that we definitely have a bit of a large size for our card headings. So if we go back here and if I check out our H5, oh, it looks like I said H2 right here. I should have said H5. So if we go back, this is now much more like it. It looks amazing. Chat smarter, not harder with Brainwave, and we have these nice looking cards. Of course, you can implement an on click right here, and then you'll be able to navigate somewhere, for example, to show more details about a specific benefit or a feature. Again, fully responsive. So if we go to a smaller view, you can see we have 6. And if we go right here, we'll have only 1 per row. And it looks and feels incredibly natural for mobile devices as well. So with that in mind, our benefits section is now done. And the next section we'll implement will be this AI chat collaboration section, which looks great on desktop. You can see a big heading on the left side with some illustrations on the right side. And if we go right here, it looks great on mobile as well. So let's get started with collaboration. To get started with the collaboration section, we can first create a new component within the components folder called collaboration.jsx, and we can run RAFCE and immediately import it within our app by opening a new tag and saying collaboration coming from components. Then if we scroll down, you can see collaboration right here. We can command click into it and start implementing it by first wrapping everything into a section coming from /section, which is going to just give it some space. And we can give a special property of crosses to this section, which will also, on larger devices, apply these crosses above the section. This just applies some visual interest so that it's not boring when you scroll. You sometimes have those crosses as well for different sections. And if you remember, it is so simple to do it now because right here within the section, we have implemented a special crosses part, which then adds this div with crosses, which is basically just a collection of SVGs. With that in mind, right within our section, we can create a div. That div will act as a container, so it can have a class name equal to container, and on large devices, flex. So now if we scroll, you cannot see anything. Within that div, we can have another div, and that div will have a class name of max-w-25rem. So this is for the max width, and right within it, we can render an H2 that can say AI chat app for seamless collaboration. There we go. And we can also style it a bit by giving it a class name equal to H2, margin bottom of 4, and medium devices, margin bottom of 8. There we go. Now, if we go below that H2, we can render a UL or an unordered list. And on a finished website, that's going to look something like this, where we need to map over a couple of different elements, such as integration, automation, and top-notch security. So we can give this UL a class name of max-w-22rem and margin bottom of 10, and on medium devices, margin bottom of 14. Right within it, we can map over our collab content coming from /constants by saying collab content dot map, where we map over each individual item, and for each one, we return an li. Now, this collab content is just a simple array with 3 objects that have different titles. That's it. And we can also pass special collab text, such as this one right here, which will pass into the second property. So let's give this li a class name equal to margin bottom of 3 and padding y of 3, and a key equal to item.id. Now, if we save it and go back, you cannot see anything, and that's because we have to provide some content within the li. In our case, that's going to be a div, and that div will have a class name equal to flex and items-center. Right within that div, we're going to render an image, which will have a source equal to check. This will be that check mark, which is coming from /assets, with a width of about 24 and a height of 24 as well. Now, if we go down, we can also render an h6 element and render the item.title for each of these checkboxes. That's going to look something like this. So now we can also give this image an alt tag of check for accessibility purposes. And this h6 can have a class name equal to body-2 and margin left of 5 to provide some space between the elements. That's looking much better. Now, if there is a text, such as in a case of the first property, we can then check if item.text exists. Then we can render a p tag that's going to have a class name equal to body-2, margin top of 3, and text-n-4, and it can render the item.text. So if we save it, now we can see the text right here. This text should go outside of this div, not within this specific div that contains the checkbox and the text. So let's put it just below, and that's going to make it look much better. Now we also have to implement this button, try it now. So that button will come below the UL, and that button will now be simple to implement as we have our own custom reusable button component, which can say, try it now. See how simple that was? We now have a reusable section and a reusable button. As you develop your apps and UIs, it's all about creating that custom UI that you can then use and leverage, which is great. And Tailwind config, of course, makes it easy. Not that long ago, we had a custom class, and this container here is a custom class that applies a width, but also applies some media queries for different widths. And it's very useful to expand on the typical Tailwind config with colors, font families, and so on, so you can more easily create reusable classes. Great. With that in mind, we can start focusing on the second part of our collaboration component, which is this illustration right here. So to create it, we can go below the button and below this div and start focusing on the right side of the screen, at least on desktop devices. On mobile, everything is just below. So let's create this div that will have a class name equal to, on large devices, margin left of auto, on extra large devices, W-38 rem, like this, and we can now put something within it. Specifically, I'm going to put a p tag that will render the collab text coming from constants. This is a special text, which is just basically a string, but it's better to extract it into constants and then use it like this than to type it manually right here. Now, let's also style it a bit by giving it a class name equal to body-2, margin bottom of 4, text-n-4, on medium devices, margin bottom of 16, on large devices, margin bottom of 32, and on large devices, W of 22 rem. Also on large devices, margin X of auto, so we provide some margin or spacing between the elements. Great. Also, to divide this text from this button, we can also maybe add a margin top of something like 2, or maybe even more, such as 4. Now that we have that, we can start focusing on the right side of the screen, or as I said on mobile, that's below. It's this illustration that you can see. But the coolest thing is, this is not just a single image. If you try to drag and drop, you can see that each one of these icons is a separate thing. So this is not just an illustration that you just place on the screen. Rather, we're gonna develop this circle and the way that the elements go around this brainwave logo. It won't be easy, but we'll do it together. Right below this p tag, we can create a div that will act as the wrapper for this illustration with a class name equal to relative, left of 1/2, flex, w-22rem, aspect-square, because it's a square illustration, border, border-n-6, rounded-full, minus translate, -x-1/2, scale of 75, and on medium devices, scale of 100 to make it a bit bigger. So if we do this, you can now see this outer circle appear right here. We have just created a circle. That's it. Basically a div acting as a border that then has the round full property, which gives it a maximum border radius. Now, I think you can see where we're going with this. Right within it, we can create another div that will have a class name equal to flex, w-60, aspect-square, margin of auto, border, border-n-6, and rounded-full. If you do that, you can see the second circle appear. Within that div, we can create another div, and that div will have just a different width. So we can give it a class name equal to w-6rem. We can also give it an aspect of square, margin auto, padding dash, something like 0.2 rem, bg-conic gradient, and rounded-full. And then within this one, we'll apply another div that will then render an image. This image will be a source equal to brainwave symbol coming from assets with a width of about 48, height of about 48, and an alt tag of something like brainwave, which is the name of our app. Now we can style this div to centrally position it by giving it a class name of flex, items-center, justify-center, w-full, h-full, background of n8, and rounded-full to make it a circle. So now it is nicely positioned at the center. But I think we're missing one circle. Even though we said rounded full, we don't yet see anything right here. And that's because I think we misspelled this conic gradient. It's BG conic. If I spell it properly, now this looks exactly like it should. As you've seen, it might have seemed simple, but we're gonna really build it, not just slap an image and call it a day. So now that we have all of this, we have to go 1, 2, 3 divs down and create a UL. This UL will wrap over collab apps. So collab apps is basically just an array of different icons. So you can see the title of the icon as well as the icon itself. And we can say collab apps.map, where we get each individual app and its index. And we can immediately return an LI, a list item. This list item will have a key equal to app.id. Within this list item, we're going to have a div. And within this div, we'll render an image that will actually render a source of the app.icon. If we do that and scroll down, you can see all of these icons appear. Now, let's properly position them on the screen. We can start doing that by styling our LI. So let's give it a class name equal to, let's make it a dynamic template string, and we want to absolutely position it on the screen. So position absolute. We're going to give it a top dash 0, and now they're going to just fly away somewhere. We won't be able to see them on the screen at all. What we also want to do is give it a left dash 1 over 2 and h dash 1 over 2 as well. Minus ml margin left dash 1.6 rem, like this. This is going to position it on a specific angle. And we can also give it an origin bottom, which is going to do a transform origin bottom property. And now we want to rotate it, which is interesting. So we want to say rotate dash, and now we want to make this dynamic. We want to apply a rotation by using $ curly braces, index times 45 degrees. So we're going to rotate it by 45 degrees, and we're going to get something that looks like this. This is great. Now, of course, we have to play with the scale a bit, right? So we can style this image within, not the div, just the image for now, by giving it a class name of m-auto, as well as a width of app.width and a height of app.height. Okay, this will change the width and the height, and we can also change the alt while we're doing this by saying app.title. This is more like it, but they're still not touching this outer circle. Let's first style this div, and then we can play with that further by giving it a class name equal to, let's make it dynamic, and let's give it relative positioning. Let's also give it a minus top dash 1.6 rem. There we go. That's much better. Let's give it a flex property, w dash. So this is for the width of 3.2 rem. Let's give it also a height of 3.2 rem. That's much better. Let's give it a background like BG N7. Let's also give it a border and a border N1 over 15. So it's going to be barely noticeable, but I think you can see it right around those elements, like they're floating. They're kind of like planets in a universe flying around the sun. So we can give it rounded dash XL to make it a circle, and we can also apply minus, so minus rotate dash, and now that's going to be index times 45. So now you can notice how they rotate, right? If I go back, you can see how these are not properly positioned right now, but if I rotate it back to where we had it, it's looking good. But now you might think, are we just not canceling out these two rotations? Well, let me show you what happens if I remove this rotation as well as this minus rotation. They're not properly positioned at all. So we have to rotate them on the LI axis, but then rotate them again for them to be properly positioned. So you can see them all in a normal view from top to bottom. Great. And with that in mind, you can see how this looks like on mobile. It's great. But if we expand it, you can also see it on desktop. But are we missing something? If we go to the finished website, you can see it looks good. What if I expand it even further? You can see that here, you have a try it now line that goes from this one to here, kind of like you're going to trigger some effect. And there's also a line going from here till the end, showing that you can collaborate effectively. It's these little details that matter. So to implement this, we can go below the UL and we can render the left curve like this, as well as the right curve right here. And these are two elements that we can import at the top by saying import left curve, as well as right curve coming from /design/collaboration. And you can see that now, if we go back to the current website, we cannot see them really on mobile. And maybe we should also provide some margin top on this. Let's do that. So if I go here to where we have our circles, I can provide a margin top of something like 2, or we did 4 before, so let's do 4. Or maybe let's do a margin bottom of this piece of text right here. Oh, we do have it, margin bottom of 4. It's weird, why is it overlapping? Let's try to increase it a bit to something like 5, or maybe even 6 or 8. There we go, that's a bit better. So now if I expand it, you should be able to see those lines appear on our current version as well. Although they're barely noticeable, you can see them right here. And how do those work, you might ask? Well, if we go into one of these, you can see that it's basically a div with an image that renders the curve, which I don't think we can see because it's an SVG, but basically it's just a line that you position on the screen, and then we use absolute positioning to properly position it once again. This project has a lot of absolute positioning, but hey, it works, right? And you need absolute positioning if you want to make something like this. But you have to make sure that it works great on mobile devices as well. Great. With that said, we have completed the collaboration section, which is yet another section in our design. Let's see what comes after that. Is it the pricing? Well, not yet. We're going to do the pricing soon. But now we have a very exciting section that looks like this. Generative AI made for creators. We have this huge over the entire screen. I'm not even sure how I would call it, but we are reusing this AI is generating, which is pretty cool. We have some more additional checkboxes. I would call it some features, right? These are different features that our app has. Oh, and I got excited. This is exciting. We are not just seeing double this huge over the entire screen image. We have a big one, and then we have a smaller one. This is, I believe, called a bento box design, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, bento box. It looks something like this. Apple has done it not that long ago, where we have more rectangles, some bigger and some smaller. You can see it here on the Apple website, and you can see just how similar it is to what we have on the screen right now. A big one and some small ones. So without any further ado, let's dive into creating our next section of the day, which is services. What are we offering? To get started with the services section, we can create a new component called services.jsx, run RAFCE, and then simply use it right here beneath our collaboration. Services. There we go. And we can just self-close it and import it from components services. Then we can go right here and we can start implementing them. This is maybe one of the most exciting sections of the application, maybe besides the hero section. I mean, you cannot really beat this, and also the mobile menu is pretty cool. So now in the services, we can of course wrap everything in a reusable section component, which we need to import. Oh, the import doesn't want to do it for now for some reason, so we can manually import it by saying import section from /section. There we go, and scroll down. Now, the ID of this one will be how to use, or meaning which services we provide. And right within it, we can have a div that will have a class name equal to container. Great. Now, within that container, we want to render a heading component. So heading like this. And we also need to, looks like, self-import it at the top by importing heading from heading. And to that heading, we can pass a title of something like generative AI made for creators. That's kind of our title. There we go. And we can also give it a text equal to brainwave unlocks the potential of AI powered applications. Now, this text won't do anything on its own, but what will is once we go into this heading and make it more reusable, allowing it to accept text as another property, and then to do something with that text, such as going in here and saying text, and we can then render a paragraph that will render that text with the appropriate class name of body-2, margin top of 4, and text-n-4. So now you can see the heading and you can also see the subtext. Great. Going back to services, beneath our header, we want to create another div that will have a class name equal to relative. This div will contain another div that will have a class name equal to, once again, relative, z of 1 to appear a bit on top, a flex, so you can flex some items within it, items dash center, height of 39 rem, like this, margin bottom of 5, padding of 8, border, border of n 1/10, rounded dash 3xl, overflow dash hidden. On large devices, padding of 20. On extra large devices, h-46 rem. Now, this didn't do a lot on its own. It just created space for something to show here. And that something will look a bit like this. This is what we're creating space for. Pretty exciting, right? So, what do we do within that div? Well, we can create another div, and within that div, we can render a self-closing image that has a source equal to service 1. And looks like auto imports are really not doing me service today. Maybe if I close the file and then reopen it, maybe now. No, still doesn't like me. Never mind. So let's auto import it from the top by saying import service 1. We can also get the service 2, service 3, as well as check mark or check from /assets. Great. So now if we save this, you should be able to see this great looking image right here. But it doesn't really look that good on its own. So let's kind of style it to be a part of that div. Specifically, we can give it a class name equal to w-full, h-full, object-cover. On medium devices, object-right. We can also give it a width of about 800 pixels and a height of about 730 pixels. And we can give it an alt tag of smartest AI. Great. Now, this is still just an image. So let's style this div containing it by giving it a class name equal to absolute top-0 left-0 w-full h-full. There we go. That's more like it. Pointer-events-none to indicate it's not clickable. On medium devices, w-3/5, and on extra large devices, w of auto. There we go. That's much better. This looks more closer to what we have on the finished version. And now below this div containing this service, we can render another div that will have a class name equal to relative, z of 1, max-w of 17 rem, and margin left of auto. Within there, we can render an h4 that can say smartest AI, and we can also render a p tag that will say, let's copy it from the finished website, Brainwave unlocks the potential of AI-powered applications. There we go. That's good. And we can also render a UL that will have a class name equal to body-2. And within here, we can map over Brainwave services. Of course, if we spell it properly. And if we get auto imports, but looks like we don't have any luck today. So I'll go right here to the top and manually import it. Geez, I just remember the times when I had to manually import everything. Brainwave services and then Brainwave services icons coming from /constants. That's going to look something like this. It's basically just photo generating, photo enhance, and seamless integration. And services icons, I is capitalized. There we go. So now you can see the three of them: photo generating, photo enhance, seamless integration. But let's put them within different li items by saying brainwave services dot map, where we get each item and the index, and we can automatically return an li that will have a key equal to index. And within that li, we can render an image that will have a source equal to check. And beneath the image, we can render a p tag that will say item. This will look like this. Now, of course, we have to style the h4, the p tag, the li, and the image. So let's start from top to bottom with the h4 by giving it a class name of h4 and then margin bottom of 4 as well. We're creating some text hierarchy right here. Then we can create another class name that will have a body of 2, margin bottom of, let's do 3 rem, and then text-n-3. So we're making it a bit smaller, and we're also muting the color a bit. Then we can style our li by giving it a class name equal to flex, items-start, padding y of 4 to create some space, border-t for top, and border-n-6. As you can see, this provided this very light color border on top. And we can also style the image by giving it the width of 24 and height of 24 as well. And finally, we can style the p tag by giving it a class name of margin left of 4. And we have just converted what was previously just an image into something that looks more like this. Great. Now, we want to do a couple more of these, right? It's not just one. If we now expand it, this is looking so wonderful on desktop devices. But now we want to have 2 more of these. And as you can notice, they're all similar. They have a title, subheading, and then some text in this case. Or no, these are just titles and subheadings without text. This right here is just the image. But once again, this is not the entire image right here. You will create this pop-up manually, as well as the image, and even this icon and this track right here that you can see. All of that will be created manually. We're not just sticking a sticker on it. Same thing for this too. Why is this useful? Well, if you have a landing page where you know for a fact that this will not change, then you could have just used that as the entire image. Same thing for this here. Everything right here could have been just a single image. Although, if it's image, it's larger in size. But if you have it like this is not taking too much computational power or internet, right? And text loads much faster than an image, which allows you to use smaller images and achieve better performance. So with that in mind, I can now collapse this. You can still see how it looks on mobile devices, and we can start creating those 2 different cards. Oh, but let's not forget, on the original card, if you expand, we have this AI is generating right here at the bottom. And on our current version, we don't have it. So let's go right here below the UL and below the div, create a new generating, like this, self-closing component, which we can import generating from /generating. We have created this component before, but we have to provide it some class names to position it exactly where we want it to be. Right now it's here. We don't want that it's there. So we're going to make it absolute so it doesn't just jump into the view. This gives us power to position it where we want, such as left 4, right 4, bottom 4. If you do that, you can see now it's here. We can also give it a border n of 1/10, as well as a border in general. On large devices, now you want to play with the positioning a bit. On large devices, left of 1/2, and this is just a trial and error. So you can just figure out how to position it properly. LG right auto, LG bottom 8, and also LG minus translate x 1/2. So now it looks great on medium, it looks great on larger, tablet, even here, and it's even here on mobile. Wonderful. Now let's go a div below and let's start creating our second service. What we can even do is we can just collapse this entire div for the first service. I think it's this one. There we go. So now this makes sense. We're going to have 3 divs within this relative: service 1, service 2, and service 3. And the bottom 2 are going to be within a grid. So we're going to play not only with flex, but also with grids. We can give it a class name equal to relative, z of 1, grid, gap between of elements of 5, and on large devices, grid calls 2. And now we can start creating our first one by wrapping it in a div that will have a class name equal to relative, min-h dash something like 39 rem, I found works the best, border dash n dash 1/10, rounded dash 3xl, and overflow of hidden. And now you can see that we have created this second card. Within this div, we can create another div that will have a class name equal to absolute and inset 0. And within it, we can render the image for this second image or for the second service that will have a source equal to service 2 that looks like this with a class name h-full, w-full, and object-cover. Now that makes it bigger. Let's also give it a width of 630, a height of 750, like this. And let's give it the alt of something like robot. That should be good. There we go. Now let's go below it and let's also add this text on top of it. Now this text will be similar to the text we used for the first one, so we can copy it. This one just below the service 1, it's gonna be this one right here, a div that contains the h4 and the p tag. So let's copy it, collapse it one more time, and use it right here below this div containing the image, and paste it. And don't forget to close this div that we copied as well. If we save it, you can see it doesn't look as good, so we have to still play with it a bit. Let's modify the styles of that div. Let's make it absolute so we get more kind of power of where we want to position it. Let's do inset of 0. Let's add a flex dash call, justify dash end, so it appears at the end, padding of 8, bg gradient to b, like this. This is a linear gradient from n 8/0 to n 8/90 with a large devices padding of 15. This applies this gradient, so it looks very nice. But this is still not similar to how it looks on the finished website, right? On the finished one, it appears at the bottom, not at the top. And I think that's because I messed up the justify end. So if I fix it, now it's at the bottom. And here, we're gonna say something like photo editing. And we can say whatever this text says right here by copying it and pasting it right here. There we go. Now we have to do this photo chat icon. I think I have coded this one before. It's just a photo chat. So if we go to the top and if we import photo, or I think I misspelled it as FOD chat message coming from /design/services, you can see how this photo chat, let's fix it. It's photo chat right here. And you can see what this is. It's basically a div, but I provided it to you because it's just a div where we have to do some absolute positioning, nothing more than that. And then it uses this double bubble wing, which is an SVG, nothing more than that. This is great. And we'll also get some more things from this design folder called gradient. We have used it before. Video bar, this will be that bar at the bottom, and also video chat message. These are all mostly just components that are absolutely positioned to be somewhere on the screen, and they use some kind of SVGs or PNGs to show some content. With that in mind, we can now scroll down. We can also use the $sign, or rather the $, sorry, apos, and then semicolon to do the apostrophe. This is the way you properly do it, because like this, you get a warning saying that you need to escape it. And then right here, below this P and below the div, we can render the photo chat message as a self-closing one, and it will appear on top. So with that in mind, we're done with the second of these services. So I believe I can properly collapse it. So this is the first one, this is the second one, and now we can create the third one. But I don't think I have collapsed it properly. Remember that I said that these two services will be within this outer div that has a display of grid. So I have to collapse this inner one, not the outer one, and then go right here below it. Now I can create a new div that will have a class name of padding of 4, BG of N7, rounded -3XL, overflow -hidden, on large devices min-h-46 rem. This will create some space right here at the bottom for the new card. Let's also create another div within it for the layout with a class name of padding Y of 12 and padding X of 4, and on extra large devices, padding X of 8 as well. Within that div, we can create an H4. This H4 will say video generation. And below that H4, we can create a P tag that can say something like this thing right here. This will be the world's most powerful AI video generation art engine. What will you create? Okay, that's a good one. Of course, let's style it a bit by giving this H4 a class name equal to H4 and margin bottom of 4. Let's also style this P tag by giving it a class name of body-2, margin bottom of 2 rem, and text-n-3 for the color. There we go, that's great. And now here, we'll have to map over all of these services. They're not just an image, we actually map over them. And for example, this one can be selected. So to implement that, right below this P tag, we can create a UL element. And this UL will have a class name equal to flex, items-center, and justify-between. Then within it, we can render the brainwave services icons. Dot map, where we get each individual item and its index, and we can automatically return an LI for each one of these. That LI will keep track of a div, and within that div, we can render an image that renders that item, which is just an icon. So should I say source is item, and we save it. And this gives you 5 of these icons. Now, of course, we can further style this by making this one selected and by giving them some kind of a background behind. I'm not sure if you can see it, but there's a circle happening behind each icon. So let's style it by giving this li a class name. It can be a dynamic one, flex, items-center, justify-center. And now we want to keep track of the index. And if the index is triple equal to 2, meaning the third element, then we're going to give it a W of 3 rem and H-3 rem as well, and a padding of 0. Let's do 3, a BG-conic gradient rounded -2XL on medium devices width of 4.5 rem and on medium devices height of 4.5 rem as well. Else, if it's not the currently selected one, then we want to give it a flex W of 10 h of 10, bg of n6, rounded dash to XL, or now that I see it, this rounded could have gone outside of this. So we could have put rounded at the start, rounded dash to XL. That way we don't have to repeat ourselves 2 times. Then let's continue. We also want to give it a medium device width of 15 and on medium devices height of 15 as well. Now, if we save it, the reason why we're getting an error is because we didn't provide a key is equal to index. This looks very colorful. But on the final one, it's not the actual full circle that's colorful. Rather, it's just the border. So what we can do is we can also color this inner div by giving it a class name where we can check if index is 2, then we give it flex, items dash center, justify dash center, w dash full, h dash full, bg dash n dash 7, and rounded dash, let's do 1 rem, and save it. Of course, we have to do the other part of the ternary and say nothing. But now, as you can see, it seems that we have completely hidden that color that appeared before. And that could be because we provided too much padding here. This padding controls how much of this circle we're going to see around it. So if we do something like padding of 0. Let's do 2.5 instead of 3, you can see that now we have just enough of this background conic gradient to show, which is exactly what we wanted. Also, for this image, we can give it a width of about 24, height of 24, and an alt tag of item so it knows what it is. And with that, we have our icons. The only thing we're missing is, well, this is a cool thing we're missing, is another chat bubble with an icon, as well as this photo, and then we have this track bar. So to implement it, we can go below this UL and below one more div, and we can create a final div right here. This div will contain an image. This image will have a source equal to service 3, and we can see this image right here. It can also have a class name equal to w-full, h-full, and object-cover. Also, we can give it a width of about 520 and a height of about 400, and we can give it an alt of scary robot, I guess. And below this image, we can render the video chat message, as well as the video bar, which are very simple components that we just absolutely position on the screen. We can style this div a bit by giving it a class name equal to relative. This will make all of the absolutely positioned elements within it properly position themselves. So now we can see this chat box. We can also give it an h-20 rem for the height. We can give it a background of n8, a rounded of XL, an overflow of hidden on medium devices, h of 25 rem. Great. And if we go 1, 2, 3 divs down, we can also render a gradient component, which you cannot see on mobile really, but now, if you're ready for it, we can expand, and this is how it looks like. I think you can see the gradient right here. If we go back, you can also see it on the deployed website. Yeah, that's great. And on the test website, we have this wonderful looking full image. We have these two smaller ones that we play a lot with absolute positioning. And it's crazy how well everything works and looks like across different screen sizes. So now if I start kind of slowly putting it like this, you can see how it collapses even more. And then finally, we have everything on one screen, and it still looks very, very nice. This bento box design has been something that I really liked recently. A lot of dev tool companies and even tech companies like Apple have started using this bento box design more and more. One that I specifically remember that has a new website design is Clerk. And if you expand it, and if you check this out, you can see right here how they have this same design, right? It's a bit different. It's not exactly the same, but it's a box in a way where you have different sizes of rectangles. So here you have two, and there here you have one. And once you hover, you have some nice animations happening on the screen. You could also play with our design and animate it so that once you hover on some, you make some animations happen. Very modern and very visually stunning and interesting design. With that in mind, we can collapse our browser and go back to our app.jsx to start working on the next section. The next section is maybe not as interesting, but definitely maybe one of the most important ones, which is the pricing section. Here you have to be really careful of how you position it, what shows on mobile, what shows on desktop, in which way it shows, and how does it look like. So here you can see how the premium and the middle part is kind of a bit exposed to the outside. It shows kind of like on top of the basic and enterprise. You have to be careful, and you also modify the colors of the buttons depending on which one you want them to use. So this section is maybe not as interesting, but it's definitely important. So let's collapse it and let's get started. I think you already know the drill, right? We'll go to our components, create a new component called pricing.jsx, run rafce, and then simply import and use it right here by saying pricing, self-closing, and there we go. It's at the bottom. Now let's navigate into the pricing and let's start developing it. First, we'll wrap everything in a section coming from /section, and we'll give it a class name equal to overflow-hidden. Then we can also give it an ID equal to pricing so that we can nicely scroll from the navbar to our pricing section. We can create a div with a class name equal to container, relative, and z-index of 2. Within it, we can create another div, and this one will have a class name. Usually, it will be hidden, relative, justify-center, margin bottom of about 6.5 rem to divide it from the bottom, and on large devices flex, meaning it will be visible. And what we're developing right now is something that you cannot see here, but if we expand it, you'll be able to see it. It's this sphere right here that we're creating. It's a very cool visual element. So we'll have to keep our browser about this size right here, so we can also see it within our development environment. So moving down into this div, we can render an image that will have a source equal to small sphere coming from assets with a class name equal to relative and a z of 1. There we go. We can also give it a width of about 255 and a height of about 255 as well, with an alt tag of sphere. There we go. That's more like it. Now we also want to add some stars around it. So below this image, we can create a div, and that div will contain an image that will have a source equal to stars coming from assets. You can see how those stars look like. Right now, they push the sphere to the left, but we can first modify the class name so that it takes the full width by saying w-full, a width of about 950, and a height of about 400, and an alt tag of stars. More so circles than stars, but it will do. And now we have to style this div so that it actually appears absolutely positioned so that the sphere doesn't mind the stars around it by saying absolute. You can see how now, immediately, the sphere is not concerned with the stars around it. It gets taken away from the general layout. Then we can play a bit with the positioning by saying top-1/2, left-1/2, w-60 rem, minus translate -x-1/2, and minus translate -y dash 1 over 2 as well, and pointer dash events dash none. There we go. That's more like it. Now, if we go 2 divs down, we want to create our heading, and that'll be quite convenient right now because we already have our heading component. So let's pass 2 things into it. A tag equal to get started with brainwave, and a title of pay once, use forever. Sounds a bit sketchy, but who knows? Maybe it's good. Now, you can only see the pay once, use forever, but you cannot see the tag. So let's go into the heading and make it a bit more reusable so that it actually accepts a tag at the top. And now it has to do something with that tag. Within this div, we can recognize if a tag exists, and if it does, we can render a tag line component like this. This tag line, of course, doesn't yet exist, so what do you say that we go ahead and create it? We can do that by moving into our components and creating a new component called tagline.jsx. We can run RAFCE, and we can quickly use it or import it from the tagline so we no longer have the error. For some reason, the auto import isn't working, so I can do it manually right here at the top by saying import tagline from /tagline, and it should be a lowercase l. There we go. Now at the bottom, we can see tagline, which means that we can jump into the tagline and start developing it. This component, to make it reusable, will also accept class name as well as children. Let's properly spell the class name, and let's start creating the layout of this tagline. Just to remind you, it should look something like this. It should have brackets on the left and the right side, and some text in the middle. So to achieve this look, we can first render the children in between of a div. So we can have a div with a class name that's going to be dynamic, that will have the tagline class, flex, items-center, and it will render the dynamic class name if it exists, or it will be an empty string like this. Now here, we'll use a special component called brackets, which we have to import from assets. This is basically an SVG. So we can say import brackets from /assets /SVG /brackets. And then we can call it as a function and pass it a side, such as the left side, and after that, we can also pass the right side. If we do that, you can see that we have here left and right. And the way it works, it's basically a React component that returns 2 different SVGs depending on the prop that we send over. And in the middle, we want to render a div, and that div will have a class name equal to margin x of 3 to divide it a bit from the sides, and text-n-3, inside of which we can render the children. Now, if we go back, we can now pass some children into this tagline, and we can pass something like just a tag, right? What we're passing from the pricing section. And that's already looking better. Now let's position it to the center by giving it a class name equal to, let's give it a margin bottom of 4. On medium devices, justify -center. And if we save it, that's already better. Great. Now let's go back to the pricing section. And below this heading, we want to render another div. And this div will have a class name equal to relative. Within here, we want to show our pricing list. And that pricing list will be yet another component. So let's create a new component called pricing list.jsx. And some of you might wonder, how often do we have to create components? Well, it's more an art than a specific answer. But when a specific component starts getting too big, you can split it into multiple. Or if you want to reuse it across multiple places. Now we can import this pricing list right here by saying pricing list, and we can import it at the top by saying import pricing list coming from pricing list. We'll also import two additional elements called left line and right line coming from /design/pricing. And we can use those right below the pricing list, left line and right line. There we go. If I save it, you can see that it's complaining that it cannot get it from /design. Let's see why is that. We're in the pricing and we want to go to the components. Oh yeah, it is just /design pricing. There we go. So if we go here, this is basically this line that you can see here and the line on the right. It's barely visible, but later on, it's going to act as a connector from the left side to the right side. Just a small visual detail. Now we can finally dive into the pricing list and start implementing our pricing section. A pricing list will essentially be just one card, which will be repeated 3 times with some small changes. So right here, we can create a div that will wrap all 3 of them with a class name equal to flex, gap-1 rem, like this, and on max LG devices, flex-wrap, so they nicely wrap. Within it, we want to map over the pricing coming from constants by saying pricing.map, where we get each individual item, and for each one, we want to return a div. Within that div, we can return an h4, and that h4 will say item.title. If we save it, you can see basic, premium, and enterprise. And this reminds us of this. These are the 3 pricing cards. So if you look into the pricing, you'll see that I created 3 different objects that contain different things, such as title, description, price, and features we can map over. So let's use all of that data to make it happen. First, we can give this div an ID equal to item.id. And we can also give it a class name equal to. And while we're developing this, we can also collapse our browser because the pricing section is also visible on smaller devices. We can give it a W of 19 rem on max LG devices, W-full, H-full for full height, padding X of 6, and you can start seeing how they're forming. Then we're going to have a background of N, 8 for the color, border-n-6, rounded-2 rem, like this. You can slowly start seeing how it's forming. On large devices, W auto, which we cannot see right now. On even elements, we can do a padding Y of 14. So this will only be on the middle one, which is the premium. On odd elements, padding Y of 8. This will give it different sizes, just to create a visual hierarchy where the premium one will seem the most important. And if you want to, you can also change the colors of these 3 cards. For now, I will simply leave it white as it is. Next, let's create a class name for this H4. Something like H4 and margin bottom of 4 will do. That's much better. Let's see why this div is complaining. Oh, it's missing a key prop. It should have been a key instead of an ID. And below this H4, we can do a p tag that will render the item.description. There we go. And as a matter of fact, let's create the full structure first, and then we can focus on the styling. Below the p tag, we can create a div. And this div, if the price exists, so if the item.price is there, it will render a div, which we close. And that div will say $. And then in a div below, we can render the item.price. Of course, you know the drill. Whenever you have 2 adjacent elements, they have to be wrapped in a React fragment or another div. So we can put them here and properly close them. There we go. Now we have the price, 0, 9, and this one doesn't have the price because it's on demand. Below this div, let's also render a button. This will be a button component that we have created before, coming from /button, and it will simply say if there is a price, so if item.price, Then it will say get started, else it will say something like contact us. There we go, already a nice looking button. Also, some of these buttons can have different styling. So what we can do is give this button a class name and give it a w-full, as well as margin bottom of 6. We can also give it an href property, where if it has a price, then it will lead to the pricing section. Else, it's going to say mail to info add, and then here we can do something else like jsm.pro. Or let's do a real one. That's going to be contact@jsmastery.pro. There we go. Now, if we save this, buttons will do different things, but we also want to change how they look like. So we can say not item.price. This double exclamation mark basically turns whatever value into a Boolean value. So if it's truly, it's going to turn it into true. If it's falsy, it's going to turn it into false. And since those two have a price, it will turn them into white, and this one will remain colored. Finally, below the button, we want to render a UL, and that UL will map over the item.features.map, where we get each individual feature and an index of that feature. And for each one, we return an li that has a key of index. And it also renders an image, which is our check image. So source is check, coming from /assets, with a width of 24, height 24, and an alt tag of check. There we go. Let's also add a p tag that will simply render the existing feature. There we go. So this is our card, but now is the time that we style it. So let's scroll all the way to the top to our description, and let's style the description first by giving it a class name equal to body-2, min-h-4 rem to give it a bit of height, margin bottom of 3, text-n-1/50. There we go. Then we want to style this div containing the price by giving it a class name equal to flex, items-center, h-5.5 rem, and margin bottom of 6. Then the div with the $sign will have a class name of h3, and the div with the price will have a class name equal to text-5.5 rem, and leading-none, as well as font-bold. That's a big price, 0 and $9.99. Then we want to scroll down to the UL, specifically to the li, and give it a class name equal to flex, items-center, or rather, I think we're going to do start here, makes more sense. Padding y of 5, border-t for top, and border-n-6. There we go, that's more like it. And finally, let's style this p tag by giving it a class name of body-2 and margin left of 4. There we go. This is our pricing card. Of course, it doesn't look that interesting on mobile, but if we now go back and zoom it out, you can see we have a nice looking card, but this definitely isn't centered like it is on the finished website, so we have to center it. But our cards are looking good. Another thing we can do is push this center card a bit up so that it appears on top of the other two by scrolling up and saying odd margin y of 4. As you can see, now it seems like it's a bit bigger. Then we can also play with the colors a bit. You can see how much better it looks like here. And we can do that by using some special properties, specifically square brackets and then end sign greater than h4. So we're targeting the h4 and we're saying first text-color-2. This will now give the first one a color of 2. Then we can target a second one by copying this and saying second text-color-2, which won't work. So the second doesn't exist, only the first one. But what we can do is we can say even, right? So we can say even, which is the middle one, right? And we're going to give it a color of 1. And then I think maybe you can guess it. If we repeat it one more time, we can say odd, text color of 3. Or rather, there's a special property of last, and this is going to give the last one a special color. Great. Now let's center this pay once, use forever by going back to the pricing, and I believe that's within heading. Here, we can also add a property on medium devices to do a text dash center, and that will properly center it. Now we're almost done with the pricing section, besides one small detail at the bottom, which is see the full details, in case you want to explore what else are you getting with each one of these pricing options. So if we go back to pricing and go below this div containing the right line, we can render another div with a class name equal to flex, justify dash center, and margin top of 10. And within here, we can render an anchor tag that says see the full details. And there we go. We can also apply a couple of class names to this anchor tag, such as text-xs, font-code, font-bold. And we can also collapse our browser to see it like this. There we go, see the full details. Let's also give it a tracking dash wider, which will make it span a bit more, and give it uppercase, border dash B, and we can give it an href pointing to pricing. Great. With that in mind, we are done with the pricing section, which looks and feels great on all different screen sizes. After the pricing, let's see what other section do we have. This time we have what we're working on section. And this is an interesting one. As you can see, once again, a lot of stuff is moving here. We're going to reuse our tagline component. I think you can see the similarity, right? So if you're wondering why this was a custom component, this is why. We are reusing it here. Then we have these different boxes saying what the app can do. And once again, all of these are custom elements which we will develop. And then we have the roadmap. So you can see that we'll essentially develop one of these cards and then create the layout and then just call it 4 different times, which is quite exciting. So let's go back to our app, let's collapse it, and let's start developing our next section called roadmap. So we can create a new component called roadmap.jsx, run rafce, and then simply import it right here by saying roadmap, import it from components, and just use it, and there we have it. So to get started with it, you know the drill. We're going to definitely reuse our section component, which we can import from /section. Now that we have it, we can also give it a class name equal to overflow-hidden and an ID equal to roadmap. Then we can have a div within it that will act as a container by giving it a class name of container. On medium devices and larger, we'll also give it a padding bottom of 10, and we can immediately display a heading property. This heading, of course, we can import from heading. That's /heading, of course. And we can give it a tag equal to ready to get started and a title of what we're working on. And immediately it looks so great. We just wrote one single line. Right below it, we can create a div, and that div will act as the container for all 4 of the roadmap cards by giving it a class name equal to relative, grid, a gap of 6, on medium devices, grid-calls-2, on medium devices, gap of 4 between those grid items, and on medium devices, a padding bottom of 7 rem. And now we're going to map over our road map. Of course, first we have to import it by saying import roadmap coming from /constants. And this roadmap looks something like this. Once again, it is an array of 4 different cards that have a title, text, date, status, image URL, and a colorful true or false property. So we can say .map, where we get each individual item. And for each one, we can not instantly return, rather open up a function block to first figure out the status of the roadmap. And status can say equal to, if item.status is triple equal to done, then we can set it to done with an uppercase D, else it will be in progress. We will use this right here. You can see how this one says done, this one says done, this is in progress, and so on. So now we can say return, and then we can return a div. What do you say that we first create the structure for it, just like we did before, and then later we can apply the styling? Let me know down in the comments what you prefer, and also let me know how it is following these videos where I type all of this code. Do you type in real time? Do I speak too fast or too slow? Just let me know and I will try to make it better. But with that in mind, within this div, we'll first give it a key because we're mapping over it of item.id. Within that div, we'll create a second div for layout. And within that second div, we'll create a third div for the layout as well. Within that div, we can then display an image. That image will have a source equal to grid, which we have to import from /assets. And if we save it, looks like we didn't close something properly. Maybe we had too many divs. Oh yeah, I'm missing the ending sign right here. That's good. And now we should be able to see the image, but yeah, you can see the grid in the background. It's barely noticeable, but it's there. We can also give it a class name equal to w-full, a width of about 550, and a height of about 550, and an alt tag of grid. Below that image and the div it's contained within, we can create another div. This one will, of course, close, and we'll give it a class name equal to relative, and give it a z-index of 1, just to know where we are. Within that div, we'll create another div that will have a class name equal to flex, items-center, and justify-between. And within it, we'll render the tag line coming from tag line, which will render the item.date. There we go. Now you can see 4 different dates appear right here. Below the tagline, we can render another div, and within that div, we can render an image. This image will have a different source depending on its state. So if source is equal to, if item.status is triple equal to done, then we can render a check 2, else we will render a loading 1, and make sure to import them from the assets. We can also give it a class name equal to mr of 2.5, like this. We can give it a width of about 16 and a height of about 16, and the alt tag can be status. Now we cannot see it on mobile, but if I expand a bit, we should be able to see that icon. No, not yet. Later on, it should look like this. We're rendering the check mark. Oh, that's because we are on the dark background, so we cannot yet see it even though it's there. Later on, we'll add some color to it. And below that image, we can render a div that will have a class name equal to tagline, and it will render the status. So now you can see in progress, and right next to it is the icon that we cannot see right now. Finally, if we go 1 and 2 divs down, we can render another div. This div will have a class name equal to margin bottom of 10. And within it, we'll render another image. This is the most important one, that will have a source equal to item.image URL. It's also going to have a class name equal to w-full, a width of about 630, and a height of about 420, and an alt tag of item.title. That's going to look something like this. We have 4 of these different images now in not so good of a layout. So let's go here, collapse it, and yeah, this is definitely not that close, but we're getting there. Below this div containing the image, we can render an h4 that will render the item.title. There we go, chatbot customization. And below the h4, we can also render a p tag, which will render the item.text. There we go, that's looking good. Immediately, we can give this h4 a class name of h4 and margin bottom 4. And we can give this p tag a class name equal to body-2 and text-n-4. There we go. So I think you can see what's happening here. All of this is a flex layout, each card, but right now it's a flex row, whereas it should have been a flex column. So let's scroll all the way to the top and let's start implementing our class names by adding some additional styles to our divs. We can start from top to bottom with this div that has the key of item ID. We can give it a class name equal to, it's going to be a dynamic one. On medium devices, it will be flex. On even elements and medium elements, we can run a translate of y 7 rem to kind of move it a bit. This will allow us to have that layout where not all are just appearing in a single line, whereas on desktop devices, one is up, one is down, and they seem kind of dynamically flowing on the screen. Let's also give it a padding of about, let's do 0.25 and rounded dash 2.5 rem. Next, we want to figure out if it's a colorful item or just a regular item. So we can open up a dynamic code block and say if item.colorful, question mark, and then we can say bg-conic-gradient, or else we can say bg-n-6 and save it. And of course, let's remove this last dash, and there we go. Now you can see it. So if I expand it, you can see that all 4 of these, or all 3 of these, look a bit pale, whereas this one really stands out, as that's the last thing we have done within our roadmap. So going a bit back, we can continue styling it by styling this inner card, by giving it a class name equal to relative, p-8 for padding, bg-n-8, rounded dash 2 rem, overflow dash hidden, and on extra large devices, we want to bump up the padding to 15. The div within it will have a class name equal to absolute, top dash 0, left dash 0, and a max dash w of full. This is the background grid, so we wanted to absolutely position it so it doesn't take away from the display of the other elements. Then we can scroll down to this div with relative, or rather to this div with flex. Finally, we can give it a max dash w dash 27 rem for the max width, margin bottom of 8, and on medium devices, margin bottom of 20. Then we want to go below the tagline and give it a class name equal to flex, items-center, padding x of 4, padding y of 1, bg of n1, rounded, and text-n-8. We can scroll down, specifically to this div wrapping this image. We can position it a bit better by giving it a minus margin y of 10 and minus margin x of 15. And even after applying those styles, it looks like the layout is still not there. I've had some issues with my divs not closing automatically, as you can see. I had to close them manually, which I haven't done in a long time, so it messed up my UI. And this was a long component. So in case something is messed up with your component as well, no worries, you can go to the description down below, go to the README, and then copy and then paste it right here. The only thing we have to change is this tagline to lowercase l. If we save that, you can see that all of the changes we've done have been successfully implemented. So if we scroll a bit up, we have this great section that has this item colorful, which applies a BG Connie gradient. And then we have 3 additional ones which have no gradient. But all of this looks amazing. And we haven't yet checked it out on desktop. So if I expand it, you can see how great this looks like. It's similar to a bento box that we have seen before, but this time it goes 1, 2, and then again moving 3, 4 right here. It's a very dynamic and interesting layout. Great. And also at the bottom, we have our roadmap. Finally, the last thing we have to do is the footer. We can see how that footer looks like. It's a very simple and minimalistic one. And once again, we utilize those crosses, which we have implemented before. So let's collapse our browser, go back to our app.jsx, and implement the footer. Of course, we have to first create it within the components, footer.jsx, run refce, and then simply import it right here, like it was always there. Now you can see the footer, which you can navigate into, and we can start implementing it. It will be as easy as turning it into a section coming from /section that will have crosses turned on with a class name of !px of 0. So we're just resetting the styles to 0 right here and using ! for important, and same thing for padding y of 10, because this section is a bit different from our typical sections as it's a footer. Within it, we can have a div that will have a class name equal to container flex. On small devices, justify dash between, justify dash center usually, items dash center, gap of 10. On max SM devices, which is min width of 640, we want to apply a flex column because this is on very small devices. And if we save it, you cannot see anything yet, but now we can add a p tag that can say something like, we can get a new date like this by using a dynamic block and saying new date and then .get full year. This way you don't have to go back and manually update it. And we can say all rights reserved. There we go. If we save it, there it is. We can also add a copyright sign, which you can just Google and then paste over here. That's just the C. And we can add a dot after the year. There we go. We can also style this p tag by giving it a class name equal to caption text-n-4, and on large devices block. Okay, it's very muted, not in your face, but it's there. And then we want to go below the p tag and form the UL, give it a class name of flex, gap of 5, and flex-wrap. And there we want to map over our social icons by saying socials, imported from constants, .map, where we map over each item, and each item is an anchor tag containing an image with a source equal to item.icon URL with a width of about 16, a height of 16, so it's very small, and then alt tag of item.title. Now you can see all of these social icons. And we, of course, have to give this anchor tag a key equal to item.id, an href equal to item.url, so we can navigate to it, and a target underscore blank. So this will open it in a new tab and not override the current URL. Finally, let's style this anchor tag a bit by giving it a class name of flex, items-center, justify-center, w-10, h-10, bg of n7, rounded dash full to make it into a circle, transition dash colors, and on hover, bgn of 6. So now if you hover over them, you'll have this nice looking transition. This is great. And with that, believe it or not, our footer has been implemented, which means that we are ready to expand our browser and check this out. The crosses are here, the roadmap is here, the footer is here, the navbar is here, and you can click on different parts of the website to scroll through them. You can also click on Brainwave to check out our amazing homepage. Congratulations! You came to the end of this video and you have developed the entire Brainwave application. Now comes the exciting part. We are ready to share our project with the world, which means we need to deploy it to the internet. So to do that, open up your Hostinger dashboard and navigate over to your hosting and domain name for this project. Once you're there, go to File Manager. This will open up an H panel where you'll be able to drag and drop the files of your application. There we go. You can head over to public HTML, delete the default PHP, and we are ready to upload. But the question is, upload what? Well, in this case, we have to run npm run build. And you can see this within your package.json. If you go to scripts, there is a build script. So go to our terminal, stop it from running, and then run npm run build. This will create an optimized production build of our application in just under a second. It will create it under a new folder called dist, which you can see here. Right-click it and click Reveal in Finder or Open in File Explorer. And the only thing you have to do is expand it and then copy and paste everything from here to our H panel. This process should take just under a minute or under a second, and you can go back to our dashboard. Finally, click your domain name. Just like that, in a second, we have deployed and hosted our application and all of the amazing things we have implemented. This is looking great. As you scroll down, you can notice that everything is here and everything works wonderful. We have our pricing, we have our roadmap section, which we have implemented not that long ago, and our footer. And if I click, you can see how fast it loads. And also, we must not forget that it is HTTPS secured, which you can see by going to Security, SSL, and you can see that the SSL certificate has been applied. And with that done, phenomenal job on coming to the end of this video. I'm very proud of you. Since you came to the end, you might be interested in our ultimate Next.js course hosted on jsmastery.pro. The link will be in the description. Now you have built a Vite application, but you're definitely ready to dive into everything that Next.js 14 has to offer. And this is not just React. Some people think it is, but it's more. Many companies use it, but you can end up using it just like good old React, which is not gonna work because your performance won't be good. So in this case, I wanna teach you how to have your performance be at the top levels and through a specially crafted process, where we go through a series of deep dive lectures with a lot of illustrations explaining the ins and outs of Next.js, where you build and deploy a very complex app, and with active lessons where you not only watch the tutorial, but also participate in building it by being given a task, examples, resources, and even hints to develop it. Finally, you'll build the complete Stack Overflow clone, but an even better version of it, a modern Dev Overflow application, which looks and feels amazing. So with that in mind, if you want to dive in and the tech stack of 2024 and beyond, just go to jsmastery.pro and join over 3,000 developers that have already enrolled. With that said, thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a wonderful day.